Hello, everyone. My name is Linda Doyle. I'm the Provost here in Trinity, and I'm actually the returning officer for this event. So obviously, as returning officer, I'm delighted to see all candidates here. I just want to welcome you all, to welcome our wonderful candidates, their teams, their friends, and voters from the constituency. Since the 1930s, Trinity has had fantastic people representing us through the Seanad. You know, whether we think about Mary Robinson, Mary Henry, Noel Brown, Ivana Bacik, David Norris, and more. I think one of the things that we can say is that they have really made an impact in Ireland, spoken for marginalised voices and done much, much more. And many of these people started off unknown and made their names through the Seanad, which is something that I think is very important. This is quite a historic occasion. I'm sure most of you will realise by now this is the very last time that the Dublin University, the Trinity constituency, will elect its own senators. So, obviously it's a kind of poignant moment, but I'm completely delighted, I have to say, that the franchise is being extended. I think that's really, really important. And in fact, I was discussing earlier, I think actually it would be very, very important that all Irish citizens actually could vote in the Senate. I think there's a few things I just want to say about it going forward that I think are really, really important. The next time you will be voting in this election, it will be a higher education constituency. And that constituency will be a national constituency. And one of the worries actually, and I mentioned it on the day all of these wonderful people signed up to put their names forward, that national constituency, I think it'll be a bigger challenge. You know, you might need deeper pockets or to be more well known to put your name out there and start running in it. So I think it's incumbent on us all to make sure, I suppose, that the spirit that we see here continues as we go forward. But in any case, we're here this evening, I suppose, to concentrate on tonight's hustings and the candidates that we have here. I just wanted to comment briefly on the higher education sector, because this is about the higher education sector fundamentally, and the panel related to that. And when you do look around the world at the moment, it's undeniably the case that higher education, I think, has really been devalued. We see a devaluing of the role of the expert. We see a devaluing of research-informed policy. We see kind of a polarisation of views. And I think we all really do need to work hard to make sure Ireland doesn't go down that route. And I think part of having strong voices in the higher education sector is about that. There's an onus on us in that sector to live up to things and to do a good job. And I think there's an onus on all of us here to fight and defend the higher education sector. And, you know, I've been thinking about this too in the context of Ireland. I do feel, and I don't want to make everyone really gloomy at the start of this, there is a complacency about the future of Ireland at the moment. There's a huge dependency kind of on one sector. And, you know, when I look back at conversations in the past, there was huge discussion about the knowledge economy, about the value of research and innovation, about the transformative nature of education. And actually, I don't hear that as much anymore. So I'm really delighted we are here with a group of people who are courageous enough to put their names forward for election. It's never an easy thing to do, to put your name forward for election, who are courageous enough to stand up and be counted, to take the criticism and the challenges that come with that, and are there to talk about the issues that matter for Ireland and for the higher education sector. So I think congratulations to you all for getting this far and putting yourselves forward. So with that, I'm going to be handing over to Áine Kerr. Áine is our moderator for the evening. Before I do that, I would just like to thank all of the people who are involved in running the election itself. Our academic registry is the part of Trinity, and the College Secretary's office run the election for us. There's a huge amount of work that goes into it. And I'd like to thank our communications office for putting this event together tonight. I think it's really, really important that people get to hear from the candidates. There's nothing better than hearing ourselves and hearing what you have to say. And I think we're very delighted to see all of you turn up this evening and give your time to us. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Áine. Áine Kerr is going to be the moderator for the evening. She's an experienced journalist. She's an entrepreneur, a very successful entrepreneur, and chair of many interesting boards. She has 2 masters in journalism, I think, and business, and a fellowship at Columbia University in NYC. So I think she's perfectly positioned, both from the journalism and the interest in education, entrepreneurship background, to be here and be the moderator this evening. So Áine, thank you very, very much.
Thank you. And that microphone
there.
Superb. Thank you so much to those of you joining us here here in the room in Trinity College, and for those of you online who are joining us as well. My hope is that over the course of the evening, you are going to get to witness and to hear a very engaging debate. My goal, as I said to the candidates earlier, is really to try and wrap a process, a format around their ideas and their aspirations for Trinity College and the country at large. While some of you were making your way in tonight earlier, in front of the candidates, so all very transparent. We basically put all of the names into a hat and at random order took names out, and we had the candidates that you see before you were drawn for debate 1, and then candidates remaining in the pot were drawn out for debate 2. I should acknowledge that we have one candidate who wasn't able to make it this evening, Abbas Ali O'Shea, due to personal reasons, but we will play a video from Abbas in the second half, so after debate 2 tonight. So as I mentioned, hello and welcome to our live stream audience. We will be curating questions from online audience later that I'll be watching for here on the laptop, but we also want questions from you, our audience. We'll be trying to ensure that there's 15 minutes. There will be roving mics. We'll talk later about how we'll do that, but just as you listen to the debate for the next 50 minutes, we do want to hear from you, the audience, the voters, citizens who have a real say in the 3 seats that are at stake tonight. My goal here as well, when I mention an engaging, lively debate, is to make sure also that it's one that is respectful, and that each of you as an audience member can ultimately make up your minds, feel like you can make an informed decision about how you cast your vote. And I've encouraged all candidates, we want to have a debate, but I will be the moderator, and it will be through the moderator with the audience online and here in the room in mind. I should mention, in the event of any emergency, which hopefully will not occur, you can see our fire exits at the back of the room and here to my left of stage in the event that we have to leave in a calm, orderly manner. I think that is enough to get us started and keep us on time. So I'm going to introduce the candidates that you see before you. And again, the order in which they're seating was based on the order in which they came out of that drum earlier. So immediately beside me, you have Hugo McNeill, followed by Catherine Zappone, Marcus Matthews. Seated next to Marcus Matthews, you have Derek Byrne, we have John, but I know you go by Jack in some circumstances, Jack Mulcahy, Aubrey McCarthy, we have Hazel Chu, and then Senator Lynn Ruane. So the first topic I'm going to go to tonight, and I'm going to try and ensure that we get through about 3 topics in each debate. Let it breathe a little bit, but what I don't want for you, the audience, is that you feel like we just lightly dusted across like 20 different topics. I don't think that's a good experience. So what I'm going to try and do is be disciplined by coming to a different topic after about 15 minutes each time. And the first topic for this panel tonight is that of education, which we just heard the Provost reflect on and talked about the devaluing of it globally. And obviously, one of the big topics that we see play out here in Ireland is that of funding. And most of our candidates, I'm sure, are across editorials like that of the Business Post, which went to starve our universities of the funding they need, is to betray the future of this country. The Irish Times headline, universities say they face shortage of funds to pay existing staff this year. Hugo, I might just come to you first. When we look at core funding, when we hear the Provost there, what's the single one? Because we're talking in the millions here. I think we still have a 72 million shortfall in budgets in higher education. What do you think is the most persuasive argument you would make in the Seanad, if elected, to convince a government to invest more monies in higher education?
Well, thank you for the question. I think we've all had the great privilege of spending time in Trinity. I had the privilege of being a scholar and not just studying an economics degree, got a chance to do Anglo-Irish literature at the same time and benefited from that. So I share the sort of the concerns when I hear people talking about the pressures on the university education, and I think it has to be a priority. I think it has to be elevated to a higher priority than it is now, and look at much broader ways of funding the university, because if we don't, we will see the sort of devaluation that you're talked about. One of the key strengths of Ireland is the sort of the intellectual property, is the kind of the ability and the education of the workforce. And if we devalue that, or if it's seen to be lagging behind other countries or others, then I think we're in very serious trouble. And so I think if I was in the Seanad, I would be advocating strongly for increased funding right across the board, not just in one or two subjects, but right across the board, and demonstrating the benefit that that has given to this country over the last while. And one of the reasons why our economy is so strong over the last 30 years, and when I was in Trinity, was 50, in 1980, there was 20% unemployment. Half of that was more than 1 year. And actually, one of the things when people look back and what got us out of that was actually the strength of our university systems and providing the employment of the multinational companies come in. And I've spoken to a load of multinational heads, and they talk about the sort of the strength of education as compared to others, but they also highlight the risks.
Okay, thank you. Catherine Zappone, to bring you in there, I know you talk about in your website and election literature a lot about guaranteeing access, and you use the word guarantee. Do you have any idea of what the costs associated with that would be? What's the size of the budget required to absolutely overset it?
Well, thank you. And if I may, I want to support what Hugo has just said, and also what the provost said. And in relation to, and I'll come to access in just a moment, but in relation to securing the future of higher education and accessibility to it, it is absolutely critical to sort out the core funding gap. And as long as we have a gap, as I would understand it, we aren't really getting the increasing levels that we require in order to sustain and maintain the kind of reputation, and Hugo's mentioned this, that Ireland has, particularly the reputation that we have in relation to educational attainment. And it's very high, and there's no reason why in a European country where we're top 3 in GDP in relation to the EU, that we can't do that. One of the things that I would do, I think, and I guess as a former minister, I do have experience in relation to negotiating budgets and winning some things. But as I've studied the issue around the funding for higher education, a lot of the figures move around regularly in terms of how much the gap really is, and I think that would need to be really clarified, understood better, and communicated in terms of the core funding gap, the pay gap, and a gap on the other side, which has to do with actually to enable our students to really thrive while they're here.
Okay, and I'm going to bring Marcus in there, and I will come back to follow up. Marcus, how would you think about that shortfall? We know increasingly universities are taking in international students because they're trying to make up these deficits. So is there anything strikes you about a persuasive argument or another revenue stream for universities?
So I tend to look at everything through the economic lens. I think that's basically how public policy, good public policy gets done, and we tend to depart from that fact a little too often. 2 conversations recently come to mind which I think are highly relevant and can focus this topic. So I was speaking with one of the officers of USI the other day about the lack of funding for PhD in terms of below the living wage. I think that's a huge issue, because if we don't have highly trained people, particularly in the STEM subjects, then it damages our competitiveness and our ability to attract industry. That brings me to a hybrid of 2 conversations in the private sector that I've had recently concerning hydrogen energy, which we have an opportunity here to make a big play for. It's a major emerging aspect of the global economy. And I'm involved with a startup science team about bringing that science venture here into Ireland. That brought me into a conversation with Research Ireland, formerly Science Foundation Ireland. And they're quite well resourced and put together, and their whole premise is based on the ability of high quality PhD and postdoctoral students in the STEM subjects, and being able to make offers to private sector ventures trying to do exciting science and game-changing industry developments that will drive a lot of our income and tax revenue, particularly in the sunrise industry. So if we don't fund universities, and we don't fund students in that way, we won't be able to compete internationally. So that's why we have to do it. It's not an option not to do it.
Derek Byrne, to bring you in and switching gears a little bit then of, if we had the magic wand of funding, I know the financial barriers for students is something you think about a lot. What do you think has to radically change? If you were elected to the Seanad, what are the 1-2 things very practically that you'd be advocating for?
Thanks, Áine. Yeah, well, I have worked in the Department of Adult and Community Education at Maynooth University. I'm in my 21st year there. And what I've seen teaching on the Addiction Studies program is how adult education, lifelong learning actually has such a positive impact on the lives of individuals. I've seen people, who had been addicted to drugs change their lives because they had access to higher education. It's changed their own lives, their families' lives, their communities' lives, and ultimately it's great for society. But one of the problems we have is that a lot of these students cannot find funding for when they want to move on. They can maybe get funding for the access programs, but funding isn't available for many of them after level 7, and that creates a major barrier. So I think what I would do in terms of if I was trying to make a case for funding is kind of say, well, look, if you improve the lives of individuals and bring them into the community and to society where they are contributing. I mean, I'm very much against this neoliberal agenda that we're seeing in higher education at the moment. I really, have a problem with that, and I think that that is something we need to challenge. Certainly, those of us who are academics. But I think it's just about putting the case across for value for money, which is what makes people listen to you. That it's much better to invest in people's lives, to invest in individuals, so that they can improve their lives, improve their families' lives, rather than keeping them down, relying on social welfare payments. And not moving along and not progressing. That would be the argument I would put forward.
Okay. John, Jack Mulcahy, to bring you in on a similar topic, your own website manifestos talks about, underprivileged backgrounds, trying to make sure that there is an education that can be reformed. All of that requires funding. But again, 1-2 practical things that you would do to ensure education is the equaliser and is available to all of society.
Thank you, Áine. You're focused very much, and we're here in Trinity, on tertiary, but in fact, my experience in education, which I've been involved with for over 30 years, is actually early education, K2, and literacy. And you can talk about tertiary, but in fact, as an equalizer, I think as a society, you actually want to really make sure that you get kids through primary school. Because if they don't get through primary school, then just debates about access to tertiary fall away because they never get that far. So I think for myself, if I was allocating resources in education, I would absolutely focus actually on the earliest years. And all studies show that, in fact, kids that are better educated, of course, then move through the entire education system into tertiary. Within tertiary itself, it's such an incredible deal. I think Ireland is probably the only country in Europe now which practically for €3,000 you can get a year's education in a fantastic university, be it Trinity, UCD, or anywhere around the country. And I think years ago I was working in multinational. I was on the pension scheme, and they were kind of, because of legislation, that the in-house pension scheme of a multinational in this country was being done away with. And I said, no, we don't want to do away with this. This is an incredible pension scheme. We need to market it to our employees, how good this is. And I think that's something which could be done much better, not just to the students who are here, but to prospective students and also international companies coming here, to explain to them that not only do we have a fantastic tertiary system, but we're almost unique in Europe at the cost of it now is allowing access for all.
Okay, switching gears a little bit, Aubrey McCarthy, you talk about a kind of a holistic approach to education, not one just that is just defined by academic success, but is looking at the child, the young person, the graduate, personally, professionally. Are there ways in which you've been thinking about that curricula reset? We can have all of the monies and budgets in the world, but then how you apply it for graduates and young people today? Give us specifics on what you mean there.
So Áine, even my own journey, education itself was liberating. And when I founded TIG Linn, I have found that education itself can open doors and recreate futures for people. And I have watched people who have come from dire circumstances transition from homelessness and inequality to access high-level education and absolutely redefine their future. I will say programs like the Trinity Access program have been fundamental to change the way people can access education. It inspired me by seeing that program to go to Simon Harris, who was the Minister for Higher Education, and create a fund. And he gave us 830,000 a few years ago for a cohort of people that come from homelessness and addiction to get into third level, up to level 9. So over the last number of years, I have seen people who were written off from an educational point of view actually go and get their masters. There's one guy who came to me at the Lighthouse, which is over the wall here. He had no leaving cert. He has now done his second master's degree. So I will say there's a quote from Amartya Sen, the Nobel laureate, and he says that there should be a floor through which nobody should be allowed to fall, whether that's in relation to your housing, your health, or your education. And one's ability to participate in society is the test of that. So I will say funding, the lack of it, should never be a barrier. So we need to look at all avenues to open educational pathways to everyone.
Okay, thank you for that. Hazel Chu, your own election literature talks a lot about access to education, ensuring equal opportunities, particularly for those of different socioeconomic backgrounds. Again, just very practically about application of budgets, how you do things differently if you were inside the Seanad, what you'd advocate for. One or two specific ideas.
Well, Harry, we recently just had a giveaway budget, yet when the provost wrote to the government to ask for more increase of core funding, what we were given was incremental funding that was cancelled out by inflation. So what happens is that with the 2022 policy for core funding, none of it has been met. So that is the first thing any senator, if they are to be successful, needs to be pushing on. The core funding that will allow for the betterment of the college in a aging digital infrastructure that we have as well, and aging assets as well. We don't need to be selling off our assets or giving naming rights to others to try to continue on the service model that we have. But it's taxing on the staff. It's taxing on the students. You see students and staff that achieve remarkable achievements, yet at the same time, they're not being supported because they're not being supported through the lack of funding for the college, but they're not through being supported by, well, the cost of living that we surround ourselves in. Right now, any college student will tell you one of their key issues is finding affordable accommodation. So one of the key things as a senator we need to do is advocate for a state-backed cost rental system. So right now, we have pushed out affordable rental. We have pushed out cost rental, but only 2,000 units. That needs to be across the board where it's state-backed for students and for our administration staff as well. Because how many of our lecturers, of our admin staff can actually afford to live in smack bam in the city centre? But there also needs to be an increase of cap funding as well, because all our assets around, like Trinity College is smack bam in the city. It's part of Dublin City and part of the fabric of Dublin City. It needs local authority through national government should be funding those capital assets as well.
Okay, thank you for that. Lynn Rowan, to bring you in there on staying on that theme of empowering communities access, you talk in your own manifesto about this concept of social research links between universities and communities. Could you talk about some ideas there, but specifically that one, please?
Yeah, so research partnerships, I think over the last number of years or even decade, we see a lot of focus on scientific style research and maybe not so much maybe on community collaboration in relation to the arts, in relation to other types of subjects where you can work with different partnership models. So say, for example, at the moment, I've been drafting a strategy on violence for the Canal communities to be able to create like a partnership between the community and a criminology department where they look at the research on the ground as to what is impacting these decisions. So when we look at education, we can talk about the core funding gaps, we can talk about the amount amount of people on, short-term contracts, all of that. But there's no real wider analysis in terms of understanding the intergenerational poverty, inequality, who gets to go to university, who doesn't. And if we don't really begin to address those core issues and those core drivers of why this exists in the first place, well, then we'll keep doing them cosmetic conversations around the top around who can we get to give funding where. And I think universities really need to embed themselves much wider out in all the different constituencies around the country, or whoever is closest, and actually work with them to build that social capital, build that cultural capital, because it's not all financial reasons why someone may not go on to university. It's also that's not a place for me. So you need to embed yourself in all of the community so that everybody rises. There's no point in us having one person that transcends a particular situation and gets into a university. We've only really achieved anything in relation to equality when communities can transcend those situations as collectives.
Okay, thank you for that, Lynn. Catherine, suppose you want to come in there?
Thank you. And just to come back to that access issue, I mean, I think, and to follow on, as Lynn says, that the research from the communities themselves is really important. As a founder of An and which is the largest community education in the country now, has been educating people within the Telewest communities for the last 35 years. And what we're learning is, yes, you need to start with the people. And you need to hear what they want to do and where they want to study and what they want to study. And that's a part of the research that needs to be brought to find these solutions. But one of the other things is, and it's we've recently established a national tertiary office. And I think what we need to do is with that to ensure that there are linkages between when people are studying in community education, moving to further education, and then to university education. Those links, the accessibility and the affordability need to happen at each point in terms of that lifelong learning process. And that ensuring that we have those linkages would be a key way, which I think it could really flourish and blossom and scale up the numbers of people who have accessibility as they want it.
Okay, anyone else want to come in as a follow-on, Derek?
Yeah, I just, I would agree with Lynn that it's not all financial reasons that prevent people from accessing further education. But what I'm really concerned about at the moment, that there is an emphasis on money. There is an emphasis on the shortfall that universities have that they have to find from somewhere. And I think we need to be very careful that that doesn't impact negatively on the quality of education that we are delivering and that we're offering. There's no point in people going to, having further education, going to universities, if the quality and the standard of what they're doing falls down. I just think we need to be very careful about that.
Okay, thank you, Derek Byrne. Anyone else want to come in before we leave education?
I think it's also important that when we look at funding and the need for funding in all sorts of places, and obviously there's lots of competing sectors that need obviously massive injections of funding for society to be able to operate well. But we have to remember, even looking at Trinity College itself, right, and the footprint it has on society as a whole. And I don't think that policymakers truly understand. There's the institution, there's the building, there's the idea of Trinity, but then there's what exists within that in terms of what it produces, like whether you're a social worker, whether you're a nurse, whether you're a teacher, whatever, a dentist, whatever profession you're working in out there in the world, right? So then we need to ask the cost of funding the sector well. What's the cost of not funding the sector well? Because we have to be able to switch that narrative and go, the social and impact that Trinity College graduates and the research that they work on, or the jobs that they work in their everyday life, they have real meaning in society. And we don't measure that at all. So I really think we need to reimagine what it actually means to have a well-funded sector that creates good workers, that provide services that we all need and depend on.
Okay, and I'll take one follow-on.
Just on, you did mention when you were talking to me there about the whole person model. One guy, I mentioned that he had his second master's degree. And when I first started working with him, we got him into a college in Dublin, and he was doing a level 5. He was living on the streets and he was studying in McDonald's, and he failed that level 5. So I asked him, is it okay if I talk to your lecturer and tell him that you're living in adverse circumstances and see if you can just do that module rather than repeat the year? When I rang the lecturer said, no, if he can't stand the heat, he shouldn't be in the kitchen. Then I got in touch with a SETU, and now the guy's on a second master's degree. So like Lynn said, it has to be person specific. The access to education can be bite-sized and can be different for the individual.
Okay. Very good. Okay, so hopefully for the audience, there'll be some follow-up questions. I'm going to shift then to the world world now of business and innovation. And there's probably a nice thread line there in terms of jobs of the future, how we have to think about things like artificial intelligence and the role of technology, but also getting the balance right between maybe FDI and multinationals, but then our sustainable companies born here in Ireland. But Marcus Matthews, I might have you lead out here, because poring over your website and manifesto, I came to data centres, and you have a proposal there to rescind the moratorium on data centres and permit their construction where applicants are making a reasonable effort to mitigate negative externalities. And I imagine there's others maybe on the debate will agree, disagree. What's your thinking behind that? And are jobs at its motivation? Is it thinking about multinationals and Ireland remaining competitive?
So yeah, I think I would be acquainted with, and professionally and otherwise, with people who are obviously in the technology sector and work at a high level in terms of the data center industry globally. It really is a nexus point, and we've done incredibly well as a country to seize that industry and build it out. We're extremely well connected if we look at it at a per capita basis in terms of our fiber connectivity out into the world. And it's a core driver of so many other forms of economic activity. If we don't maintain what we have worked hard to create here, it kind of will all be for nothing. So we will lose our competitive advantage in multiple different industries. It sets us up quite well, what we have built, for a launching point to seize in artificial intelligence, virtual production, and one that isn't really being talked about now, which is going to be quantum computing. So if we, kind of just continue down this idiotic track of moratorium on data centers and not working with the private sector, who are bringing forward solutions that are real and workable and more than meeting them more than halfway, it's idiotic, really. So
okay, we'll pause there. Anyone want to come in on that, just on the specifics? Catherine Zapone.
Yes, I think that we need to maintain a legal moratorium on data centers, unless they are using renewable energy and not overtaxing our grid. And frankly, some of the really big international corporations that want to come in and build these data centers should be able to do that if we insist that that's what we require them to do. So I think that's the case.
Anyone? Yeah, Hazel Chu.
Yeah. Sorry, I think we've seen this week with the recent High Court decision that the Climate Act, it can be used to support decarbonisation. So I get where Jack's coming from, but at the end of the day, we are in a climate crisis. Like, you see it in Spain, you see it in LA, like closer to closer, you're not going to be watching on phone anymore. You're going to be watching it in front of you. And the question then needs to be asked of whether you want a data center or do you want proper climate action. So, and you can definitely, to Catherine's point, if you put the onus on the multinationals and you put the onus on decarbonisation on them, then perhaps we can talk about the increase of data centres. And the foreign direct investment, they will still be coming. So that, like, the FDI isn't the issue with just data centre at the moment. It's the issue of what will happen with a Trump government, of what they bring in to pull the FDIs back.
Okay. Aubrey, I might bring you, well, Marcus, and I'll come back to you in a moment. Aubrey, what do you say to that in terms of the data centres? But also, if you were elected to the Seanad, a lot of these multinationals, and we see it through the America Chambers of Commerce now, they are anxious about cost of living here. Housing is a topic we'll come back to later. But have you any specifics on how you might hold on to multinationals, and is data centres one way through it?
Well, you mentioned, even at the start, you mentioned about AI and how it will form part of what we do and bringing the multinationals in, etc. I think Ireland has always been at the top of its game regarding tech, and I think it certainly can become a hub for even the AI industry. When you look at what AI has done in terms of medical research, medical breakthrough, and how areas that are regulated so strongly as medicine, AI plays a huge part in detecting diseases, targeting diseases, etc., and being able to diagnose. So I do think moving forward with data centers, but you mentioned AI as well, is vital. But we need to make sure, even from an educational point of view, that we don't let it take over. So, for example, the AI part, our education, we've all worked hard for it. If you now put into ChatGPT and you do your final thesis, well, that's going to be a misnomer then, and we lose out. But I will say it is part of our future. It's going nowhere, and we have to make sure that we join the dots so that it works well, both for the country and also work well for the data centre.
Derek Byrne, to bring you in there, you're proposing in your manifesto a commission on taxation. Would you tax some of these multinationals in a different way to ensure that there's more fairness? You're maybe going to limit the attractiveness of Ireland, but have a fairer tax system. Is that part of how you're thinking about a tax commission?
I'm thinking more in terms of small businesses. I think that small businesses really struggle in this country in terms of taxation, and a lot of them are pushed out of business. In terms of the data centers and in terms of my understanding of AI, like I'm quite concerned about our economic over-reliance on data centers. And I would again be concerned on the levels of energy that they use, particularly, there are reports of people living near these centers who've had problems with supplies themselves. But I wouldn't necessarily know enough, I think, to be able to comment sufficiently. But what I would say about AI is I'm very worried about it from an education point of view. We just had a meeting today, a tutor meeting, in relation to introducing declarations from students on how they use AI, if they do. I've seen how students have over-relied on it in the past. It's very clear, it's very obvious to see when a student uses AI. But also yesterday, I heard on the news about this new app that can nude things that are put up online. And from a sexual violence point of view, I'd be extremely concerned about the developments of AI in terms of those kind of issues.
Thank you for that. John Jack, you wanted to come in there, John Jack Mulcahy.
Yeah, just in relation to multinationals in Ireland, Ireland's had such a fantastic run of growth from the multinationals in Ireland. Specifically about the data centers, my understanding more than anything else, the grid isn't there to actually support more data centers. So that actually takes a long time to run out. So until that's in place, probably I would go along with a moratorium on data centers at this time. In relation to the multinationals, everyone knows we've got these huge surpluses driven by perhaps 10 large companies in relation to corporation tax, but also then for the entire exchequer. For me, that's that, apart from being an enormous risk right now in the next 24 months, it's also led the government, in my opinion, to take their eye off the domestic businesses. So ordinary people who are in normal businesses, not part of multinationals, who aren't being paid 150,000 by Google, running a small business or employed by a small business, they are actually in quite a high taxation and difficult situation between rates, taxation, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. Those, I think, that sector, it's a large sector, is somewhat suffering as a result of the government focus on the multinationals.
Okay, thank you for that, John Jack. Bring you in there, Lynn Boylan. What see you therefore? Sorry, apologies. What see you of those local businesses, small businesses that are struggling? Derek talked about, rethinking taxation. They're the ones we've seen them repeatedly campaign on things like that. Is there any 1-2 specifics that you think would help those businesses that we are seeing, unfortunately, close down week by week?
Yeah, well, I think there's sets of decision made about businesses in different ways. Like you have businesses that are small businesses that can afford to pay certain rates, certain commercial rates. But if you look in urban areas like in Tallaght and Finglas, all these places, you have people who have come up through those communities and had a level of entrepreneurship about them, and they've wanted to open businesses that are very particular to that community, whether it be a fitness, a boot camp class, whatever it may be, or a local clothes shop. And they're coming from a position where they've absolutely no intergenerational wealth, they've no safety net, a lot of them, and they're all having to close their businesses in working class communities due to commercial rates and the rent. And they're supposed to be state-run facilities in a sense. So when we look at local authority rates, I think we actually need to massively reduce them as well, so that people can actually afford to be in the buildings that they're in. And obviously that gets even worse as you move closer and closer to Grafton Street. But in relation, just to pick up maybe on some of the AI pieces, I think I would, AI is something that we need to obviously engage with. We need to be able to equip ourselves to understand it. But we do have a problem currently in terms of government and decision makers who don't actually understand the machine learning behind AI. So we have decision makers and policy makers debating topics with absolutely no understanding of what's under bonnet. So we can't actually ever check it to see if it's doing what it's supposed to be doing. If you have a car that needs an NCT, it goes through a particular and it comes out the end and you're told if everything's working correctly. We don't actually have that knowledge internally. So I do think in relation to AI, we need to intersect it as well with understanding that we don't actually know what it's doing. And I think that that's a massive problem when it comes to actually defining AI and different types of machine learning within legislation.
Thank you, Lynn Ruan. I won't get that wrong again. Apologies. Hugo McNeil, you've billed yourself as a champion for Irish business. Give me one fundamental thing the government has gotten wrong, one fundamental thing you would do differently inside the Seanad campaign for.
Well, I think before you could come on to that, I think just to pick up what Lynn has said, it's very important that we sort of understand and make the most of the capabilities of AI while understanding the challenges. And some of you may have heard Keir Starmer's speech yesterday when he was very important, in saying that the way that Great Britain could actually significantly improve the sort of the quality of their economy by embracing it, and that the battles fought today over AI will determine the employment going forward. But he also, on a human level, gave the example of a young person whose life was saved by AI because the diagnostics, which previously would have taken a number of hours, took a number of minutes, and they were able to go on for treatment. And it sort of resonated with me because that person had a stroke. I lost my father for having a stroke and not being able to be treated in the short term. So I think it's really important. I think the points of AI is massive. It's technology is capable of driving huge changes for advantage, but it has to be regulated properly.
And one thing you would do as the quote unquote champion of Irish business, is it VAT? Is there something there? Is it PRSI? What is one thing that would prevent all of the businesses right now worried that they're going to have to close this year?
I don't think there's one single thing, but I would actually, agree with you on the sort of the VAT rate in the hospitality sector.
Okay. Marcus, I'm going to let you come back in because you led us out in data centres just very briefly.
Yeah, so I feel that a lot of the comments in this attitude of the moratorium on data centers, it's quite ignorant of the factual reality of the issue to do with the grid. So what's happened is, if you look at those data center companies, they've come forward with some pretty robust solutions. They're pretty close to net zero on what they've brought to the table. What happens is that the government tries to cover up their failure for over 20 years in a public policy capacity, and attaches a load of requirements if they want to go ahead and get close to net zero. So, an offer to, well, we'll put in our own infrastructure and put in our own high voltage direct current lines suddenly becomes, okay, yeah, you can do that, but you have to connect everybody else along the way that we haven't served and haven't bothered our backside to do anything about for years. So it's kind of covering up the fact that these companies are coming to the table with sustainable solutions. It's the government in each case that's getting in the way every single time.
Okay, thank you for that, Marcus. Aubrey.
Áine, you mentioned about small businesses and taxation. So I run two small businesses, one in transport, and I also have a restaurant in Kildare. And the VAT issue is serious. It is a serious issue. We are full every day in our restaurant, but to make ends meet can be tough. So the 9% is vital. That was promised in the last election. I don't know if it'll be in the programme for government. But recently, regarding my transport business, I met up with the Department of Transport to discuss issues regarding our logistics, and the people in there discussed the new runway at Dublin Airport, which doesn't affect us in the slightest. So the research is not there, the people aren't there that take the SMEs serious.
Okay, I'm going to pause there on business and innovation to get us to our third and final topic for this first debate, and that is housing, which has been a thread line there. We heard it earlier in terms of the university debate and the question of affordable housing for students and graduates and people who want to live here in Ireland. But we heard it there again with multinationals and businesses and the affordability of living in places like Dublin and urban centres around the country. We know, Hazel Chu, there is a student housing crisis. I think that's fair to say. Anecdotally, you talk to students day to day. We know there are students who are deferring even going to college because they cannot get accommodation in city and urban areas. Is there something that you believe this next new government could do differently, that you will go into the Seanad if elected and rally and campaign for?
So just a correction there, it's not just a student housing crisis, it's a housing crisis.
Yeah.
So the first thing you do, I know the government and previous government would have said, build more housing, supply makes it better. The first thing I would do, which I've been doing on the council since I sit on the Housing Strategic Policy Committee, is to reform the Vacant and Derelict Sites Act. So currently the Vacant and Derelict Sites Act is not fit for purpose. There's a huge gap in it, which allowed local authorities to kind of skirt their obligations in terms of CPOing vacant and derelict sites properties. If you look at the Vacant and Derelict Sites Register in Dublin, there is only about 200 odd in the city centre, where really, if you walk around, there's thousands of vacant and derelict sites. It shows that the site registry is not up to what it should be, but then the pushback from the local authority is that the legislation is not what it should be. So the first thing a senator should be doing is going in and proposing new reforms for the vacant and derelict site registry. But the other thing we need to do, and it ties into your previous questions about supporting small business, is we need a nighttime economy. We need a nighttime economy, not just in Dublin, but around the country, because on top of that, we need to bring people into the city to support the businesses and have above shop living. So reforming the planning laws to make sure above shop livings happen within our city centres and around local towns.
Lynn, to bring you in there, what of vacant properties, derelict sites? Like, we know so many politicians, policymakers have gone around the country and they can identify the sites, and yet the problem persists. Is there something a senator can do to help ensure that there is mandatory orders?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's lots that a senator can do, because we can draft and table legislation, which I've done successfully while being there. But in relation to housing, in the very first term, we brought a piece of legislation in terms of the tax on derelict sites, and that wasn't followed through on and wasn't supported. I think that's something that needs to be continued. But if you walk around a community like mine this evening, and the amount of homes that are boarded up, I think the fact that a local authority is allowed to get away with the fact that they haven't gone in, and the problem is they're saying that they just need to do the renovations in terms of bringing it up to the standard of what all council houses look like. When you've people in the community sleeping in tents in Tala Village and behind a priory church, while there's buildings all boarded up and houses boarded up. And I think the fact that that's allowed to happen without any sort of sanctions, I think we're gone beyond incentives. I actually think the fact that we've 15,000 people homeless, and the amount of children's lives lost in terms of just their normal ability to play on the street with their friends, walk to school with their friends, it's so much more than the building itself. And I think that we need to actually have a 6-month plan where every single derelict site is transformed immediately, and actually just, I think every party should stand over that.
Okay, Lynn Rowan, thank you. Derek Byrne, to bring you in there, your own manifesto talks about an accommodation first model. Now, I know this is trying to get at affordable housing, but also homelessness. Very quickly, just tell us what that's about.
Yeah, well, it's a model that was actually rolled out in Finland, where they have effectively eradicated homelessness. And the premise behind it is that once someone has somewhere to live, all of the other issues that may have contributed to their homelessness can be dealt with. We see, a whole range of social issues that can impact on someone who is homeless, not being able to have a job, health issues, employment issues. But all of those things can be worked with when you provide someone, or when someone has a roof over their head. If we can see a country like Finland do it, I don't see why a country like Ireland can't. And I think our understanding of homelessness, and I learned something very important recently. We talk about homeless people. We label them. They are people who are experiencing homelessness. Our whole view on the issue, I think, is quite negative, and there isn't really at the end of the day, I don't think there's political will to actually deal with it, because it is about it's not rocket science. There are models there that work. We can do it, and a country as rich as Ireland cannot, with its hand on its heart, stand over the fact that we have people in those tents behind the shops or the church. I think also, we need to understand that homelessness is a multifaceted issue. I got a report today from Focus, one organization, about fathers in homelessness. We need to open up this debate.
Okay. Aubrey McCarthy, to bring you in there, I know you think a lot about affordability of homes, increased council development. Do you think there is something we are missing still in the acceleration of how and quickly we build houses and homes this country? Is there anything radically different? We've just gone through a general election. We heard all the ideas. If you were in the Seanad, something radically different to what's been heard before? Or do you think it's there and it's just a hard thing to do? This is complex.
Áine, I set up a homeless charity just over the wall here called the Lighthouse on Pierce Street, and we feed up to 500 people every day there, up till 10 p.m. at night time. And I will say, every time the homeless figures go up, I get a phone call from Morning Ireland or the 6-1 News, and they want me to talk about the new figures. And I think the figures we've become desensitized now. Now, as Lynn mentioned, it's over 15,199, and 4,800 of those are children. That is horrendous. It's unforgivable. And we're talking about being awash with money. I mean, how come? And yet, I can tell you, me, with a small team at Tiglin, we saw a need, for example, in Bluebell in Dublin 12, and we saw that over 60s looking for single unit accommodation is impossible. So we developed a new facility there. It's just about to be launched in March, and it's zero, it's carbon neutral. So it's going to be one of a kind, and it's a template for social housing. I've also done the same in Greystones, where I've established there was 35 guys living in a place that I had rented for years, and they were about to be made homeless. I went to the Department of Housing. They said it's a health issue. I went to the Department of Health. They said it's a housing issue. I screamed and shouted, and Simon Harris was interviewed on the news, and he said it's easier to give in to Aubrey than ignore him, and we better get stuff done. Now we won the Irish Council for Social Housing Awards in Greystones, and we've 34 units overlooking the sea with a livable community, a lovely cafe, a bakery, a sauna, and it really works. So I think there's a template there. President Higgins was up at Tiglin recently, and he said every council in Ireland should look at the Tiglin housing model and implement it in their counties.
Okay, thank you for that, Aubrey. Marcus Matthews, to bring you in there, your manifesto comes at it from a slightly different tack. You're talking about introducing targeted subsidies for developers. You're talking about overhauling the Private Rental Tenancies Board. Do you believe that that's where the problem can be fixed, is go incentivise builders still?
So yeah, I think, like, I would say that that's in the same strata as a lot of what other people are talking about here. All of these things need to be done. The big thing that we really need to do here, the big elephant in the room, is the legislation, the way it's designed. It's designed for a build to rent economy, essentially. And we've purposely engineered it that way. We've had international reports, tell us it's completely insane and it's contributing to the crisis that we have. And we need to call the elephant out, and we need to, highlight political parties that are not willing to overturn that, and we need to shred it. We need to turn it on its head, and we need to get rid of that parasitic, exploitive element, which brings in, vast amounts of money for build to rent. It works for student accommodation, short cycle kind of accommodation needs. But, people who want long-term living arrangements, we have a situation in the country where essentially people in rental accommodation, a third of their income is going on rent, and it's pouring into zero tax entities. And the irony is, if you're not a big consortium that way, you're a small-time, renter, developer, Irish developer, you essentially get taxed 40% on your rental profits. So that's the big elephant in the room, and we need politicians to go in and call it out and not let up, and really just get rid of it.
Okay, thank you for that, Marcus. John Jack, to bring you in there, your manifesto talks about reforming the planning process to simplify it. And I wonder, though, does that hark us back to a time when maybe there wasn't enough oversight, regulation of planning, and we know where all of that led? What are you actually proposing there in terms of simplifying the planning process that might accelerate housing and home development?
Well, I think it's very clear just this week in the Irish Times, where they were reporting on the development up in Dundrum, not 2 miles away from here, for a development of 800 apartments, which had been in a planning process for, I think, over 13 years. Now, there's something, just from that example, you understand there's something fundamentally wrong. And it seems to be an antagonistic approach between planning departments and developers, instead of sitting down earlier, working out the development of the specs and agreeing those, and at an earlier stage bringing in what different inputs from the community, etc., on the impact of that. There's no doubt that the reform of the planning is needed. But also, I mean, as I'm listening, and of course, at the hard edge, what Aubrey is talking about, and what also is very much in part of my manifesto, is in relation to people who are homeless. And I was particularly looking at international protection applicants, and the 3,000 of them who have come to this country. We've agreed to take them in, and then they end up in tents up and down the canal. I think that's a dreadful and an awful situation. However, what I think when I looked at the stats saying, last year there were 167,000 applications for visas in Ireland, I think that we need in some way to moderate the number coming in to match our actual housing availability and services to properly service foreigners and Irish people in this country.
Okay, so I'm going to come back for follow-up on that, but I do just want to hear from Hugo and Catherine, and then I know others want to come in on your specific point there, which I think is more immigration related. Catherine Zappone, you've been listening there on planning, on subsidies. Give us your quick point of view,
Okay,
please.
well, thank you. Just coming back to where we started with higher education, I think in relation to student accommodation, that one simple solution, and it's been being worked on, is a universal design or a standardized form of accommodation for affordable accommodation for students. The department has been working on that. We need that report out, and then we need to couple that with the funding investment. The other thing I would like to say is that, and again, having sat at cabinet and listened to the arguments for the last decade, I think we need to bite the bullet on a state or a public construction company. And it's possible that we could even transform the Land Development Agency into that kind of an agency. But I think that's what we need to do in order to really move us beyond, in order to support that, to reduce the housing crisis, and indeed to develop a state investment bank, perhaps, to provide private funding and new private mechanisms of funding, especially for smaller builders, to couple that.
Okay, thank you, Catherine Zappone. Hugo McNeill, to bring you in there, have you heard any ideas that you would sign up to? What you think of that idea of a state construction company from Catherine Zappone?
I think everything should be looked at, because we are facing a housing crisis, and we see the impact it has on young people, but right across the board. And I'm not sure that there's one specific sort of idea that you just can come up with that actually solves the problem. But I think that you got to engage with all parties who have sensible ideas, and I think we've heard a lot of sensible ideas tonight, and actually sort of work them through, because but it has to be approached as something of real importance and priority for us as a country, and by the government that's going to lead us.
Okay, thank you. Now, there was a couple of hands went up when John Jack Mulcahy made his point there about availability of housing matched to numbers coming into the country. So I'll just take each of you in line. I would just ask you to be relatively brief, because we are going to go to audience questions shortly. Aubrey.
Áine, we're talking about a crisis, and it's on the news every day of the week, but I don't think it's been treated as a crisis. And I'll give you an example how. I spoke at the Joint Houses of the Oireachtas in 2016, and I made a presentation about how we could provide a particular housing payment to people from a particular cohort, people will have a substance abusers, and to see if we can let their housing payment allow them to become better with a whole person approach. I put forward the payment. Simon Coveney was the minister. He went on record by saying homelessness would be eradicated by 2020. It was 6,000 at that stage. Now it's nearly tripled. They told me that my plan wasn't workable. Then the war breaks out in Ukraine, and 100,000 Ukrainians are able to come to Ireland. And guess what? They come up with a plan for an accommodation recognition payment, which was my plan 8 years ago. And it's easily able to put into place when it suits.
Okay, Hazel Chu. Yes. Yeah, no, it's working. It'll respond to your voice.
Hello? Yeah, okay. Just to be very, very clear here, immigration and those seeking international protection and seeking refuge is not the reason we have homeless figures, rising homeless figures. It is not the reason we have a housing crisis, and it is not the reason why we have been unable to house our homelessness. There is no us versus them here. There is no, because we protect immigrants, that we allow for refuge, that we can't protect our own people, as some people will call. It is all people. And in relation to why there is such a homeless crisis is because of the lack of joined up thinking and the lack of joined up policy. So please stop with the tropes and please stop punching downwards.
Okay, Lynn.
I think it's also important to actually challenge ideology. At the end of the day, we've had the same people making decisions about housing for a long, long time. We haven't seen anyone different in those portfolios. So there's not only a block in terms of property developers or builders in the country, there's actually an ideological block in terms of addressing housing. So people will say we want to reduce or eradicate homelessness, but they're not actually changing how they do things. So they continue to rely on a private market. So that means, again, they're failing to look at it through a different type of lens, through a lens where everybody can have a home, where everyone has the right to housing. And until we actually change the formation of what the government looks like, we're going to keep getting people who stand over something, because true leadership means you can go, that didn't work and we need to rethink housing. But they're not rethinking housing. They're just making the same decisions over and over again and increasing and compounding the issue as it stands.
Thank you, everyone. We got through a lot there in terms of education, business and innovation, and then finally housing. So we've come to the moment where they each now get to practice their elevator pitch. So all of you take a little minute. After they've done their elevator pitches, we're coming to your audience questions here in the room and online. What we agreed earlier was that we would do the opposite. So earlier I started with Hugo and went right down, and the agreement earlier was that we would do then the pitches in reverse order. They each get a minute. At the 30-second mark, we are going to hear a bell of some sort. When you hit your minute, there will be a second bell. We will mute your mic if necessary. Lynn, Ruan, you're going to lead us out.
Thank you. I have this bad job of going first. So I've been lucky enough to be a Trinity elected senator for the past 8 years, and I feel I brought a very particular style of doing the job. I am an independent, and I'm obviously in opposition most of the time, but in that opposition, I've used it well in building my relationships. I was successful in passing the end of non-disclosure agreements in the last term, and which is quite an unusual position to be an independent and in opposition, and still manage to get government departments to go and rally behind what you do. I've also worked on drugs policy for over 20 years, and it's something I entered into the chamber with and I've not let go of. And we've seen now that people have started to put that into their manifestos. And I would say that the experience that I bring, the style of way I work, but also the consistency. I've remained consistent from the moment I was elected in terms of the issues that I care about, what I want to see changed. But what I have learned is different ways of maybe achieving that and getting that and building a collective. So I feel when people vote for me, it's not necessarily only me as an individual, but it's all those different parts of different sectors that I work towards, whether it's drugs, whether it's health equity, whether it's housing, whether it's justice reform. So for me, it's about the collective work, and I would continue to ask for people to support that collective work. Thank you. I turned off my mic.
Thank you. Hazel Chu, you are up next.
I'll try to keep on time. I'm Hazel Chu. I'm a councillor. I was former Lord Mayor of Dublin. And for me, it's about making sure we build a fit for purpose Seanad, where people actually roll up their sleeves and do the work there. Like I listen to Lynn, I listen to Tom and other senators, and there are very good senators there that actually do the piece of work. They build legislation, they propose legislation, they amend legislation, and they reject what needs to be rejected for a fairer society. That's what the Seanad is for. It's not for us there to pontificate. It's not there as a stepping stone. And one of the things is we are going into a government where the current government will go in with independents, who will reject climate data, who will not bring a strong climate voice. For me, it's about climate, it's about inclusion, it's about housing. I work on a lot of housing policy. I want to make sure we have progressive policies going into the future. I don't want us to turn into Europe or America, where the far right and discourse becomes part of our everyday politics. I want us to represent what Trinity represents, inclusion, and that's what I am. Thank you.
Thank you, Hazel Chu. Up next, we have Aubrey McCarthy.
As a child, cycling into Nace on my BMX bike down to Basin Street to the old Eastern Health Board office, I remember going to the reception and saying, listen, I'm in chaos in my family. I had 3 siblings. We were part of high court battles and there was addiction and chaos. So I had a front row seat and that drove me to make a difference in life. I was told by the receptionist, unfortunately, you're too young. We can't help you. So I actually set out to solve those problems. I never criticized, but after 20 years in the shadow, I'm now trying to run for the Seanad because I want to make a difference. We're surrounded by slogans today, and in my own brochure, there's slogans as well. But I will tell you, behind those slogans, I have journeyed, and I've journeyed with the people who are crying out for help in addiction, in poverty, in homelessness. So for all of those areas, I've actually done it. And I believe the Seanad will give me a platform to amplify nationally what I have done with Tig Linn. And if you believe in the rights of people to access to housing, access to education, if you believe that people shouldn't be sleeping on the street, well, then I'm asking for you to vote Aubrey McCarthy number 1, and that's why I'm asking number 1 Aubrey.
Thank you, Aubrey McCarthy. Next up, we have John Jack Mulcahy.
Thank you. Aubrey, could I borrow your ChatGPT for a second? If I could get a speech as good. Listen, I'd like to thank Trinity College, Áine Griffin and Áine Kerr for moderating so equitably today. My policy platform is on 2 straightforward issues on my website, etc., immigration and housing. As I said, and as I was very clear, and Hazel Chu, for some reason, decided to pick that up in another way, I am absolutely in favour and advocate for looking after international protection applicants in this country. And I said 3,000 are homeless, and it's a disgrace that they're not looked after. However, the other side of this coin, which I think people like Hazel Chu do not want to hear or do not want to advocate, is that other people in this country who are impacted not just by 3,000 homeless people, by 176,000 new people entering, and the impact that's having on housing, on health, and other social services in communities around the country, their voice needs to be heard. And I will be a senator to advocate for those people in Seanad Éard if elected, and I ask for your vote. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John Jack Mulcahy. We go next to Derek Byrne.
Don't vote for me. If you want a representative who is afraid to rigorously scrutinise, don't vote for me. If you want a representative who will not challenge structural inequalities in our service provision, healthcare, homelessness, don't vote for me. If you want somebody who will tell you what you want to hear rather than what you need to hear. However, if you want a representative with a track record for challenging, for doing what he believes is right, even when it's contentious, then vote for number 1, Derek Byrne. Thank you.
Thank you, Derek Byrne. We go next to Marcus Matthews.
So this election is the 3rd in the past 12 months, and we see a repetition of a lot of rhetoric and promises. What our country desperately needs now are political entrants who offer serious solutions to the monumental challenges that are plaguing our society. And that's why I developed a multi-issue platform of hard-hitting specifics across no less than 15 sections, and which detail actions that could start to rapidly address some of our biggest problems today. This constituency has a history of electing people who drive positive change across all issues and who are highly effective at scrutinising the government and proposed legislation. I'm a candidate who has a proven experience in critiquing large-scale government policy and the development of more economic alternatives. As electors, you should seek to elect candidates who will give you the greatest bang for your vote and who will be selflessly dedicated to the role full-time. If you truly want to see Ireland solve problems like housing, energy, climate change and others, then I am the candidate for you. Vote Marcus Matthews number 1. You have everything to gain.
Okay, thank you, Marcus Matthews. We go next to Catherine Zappone.
Well, throughout my 40 years in Ireland, as an educator, a human rights activist, and as a public representative, I have been dedicated to bring a progressive, independent lens to Irish politics and to fight for equality, justice, and prosperity for all. I believe now more than ever, the voices like mine are essential in the Seanad to ensure that we have thriving higher education and research that benefits all, that we address our climate crisis with ambition and urgency, that we ensure respect for our values of diversity and inclusion, and that we reform the Seanad to reinvigorate our democracy. And we also need to address the critical issues we face in terms of healthcare, housing, emergence of AI, and poverty. I promise you that if you elect me, I will work tirelessly with determination to achieve these things and to bring your voices to the Seanad.
Okay, thank you, Catherine Sapone. We go next to Hugo McNeill.
I bring a principled approach to all policies, as I did since my days in Trinity when I was picked on the Irish team to go to apartheid South Africa and refused to go, putting my international career at risk, and then being privileged to meet President Nelson Mandela when he came to Dublin. I've tried to bring those principles approach to all the things that I've been involved in, whether it's in the world of business, whether it's North-South relations, whether it's British-Irish. But it's recently been in the great realm of the Trinity Centre for People with Intellectual Disabilities, which I talked about a little bit earlier. This is a transformational project that we saw today with the parents and the students in, and that we are celebrating and growing and are going to grow right across the country and internationally as well. And a place in the Seanad would give me the ability to help those people on your behalf.
Okay, thank you for that, Hugo McNeill. Give a round of applause to all of our candidates. Not an easy thing to do, to try and boil down your respective manifestos into 1 minute. So we're going to go now to your questions here in the audience. We have questions coming in online that I'm keeping an eye to. We will have roving mics here in the audience. What I ask when you are asking a question is, please do give your name. It's a question, not a speech. Just to be fair to everybody else, we can get through as many questions as possible. If you are here with a canvasser, as a canvasser or a supporter, that's great. Just declare it. I think in fairness and for transparency with everybody answering up here on the stage. If your question is for a specific candidate or candidates, do state that openly as well. If it's generally to the floor, I will try and get through as many candidates as possible. But again, to be efficient with everyone's time, that might not be possible. So ideally, direct it to a candidate. As I say, I will take questions here in the room. I have questions online as well, and I'll try and kind of intersperse them as we go. So can I have a show of hands? I will take one question to get us started. And then what I'm probably going to do is bundle some questions if there's a lot so we can get through them. Gentlemen here in the middle, lead us out. Give us your name. If you're here with a candidate, just say it. Question, not a speech, and direct it to a candidate. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks. I'm here with Paul Mulville. I'm a supporter. Just for transparency, my name is Dylan Murphy, and I'm a researcher in UC, a PhD student, studying energy systems and data centers. So that part of the discussion was very interesting to me. And my question is directed towards Marcus. And my question is, in your view, what is an acceptable amount of electricity for data centers to use? Because currently in Ireland, data centers, as of 2023, are using 21% of electricity, of the national electricity. And that's the equivalent of all of the urban homes in Ireland. And this is 95 data centers that we're talking about here. So in your view, what is an acceptable percentage of the electricity for data centers to use?
Okay, thank you for your question, Marcus.
I think that is ultimately determined by the capacity of the grid and, you know, peak load hours and the effect that it has. It's what is the, if you like, the carrying capacity that we can allocate towards data centers relevant to its economic value to us. That's the way I would answer that question. You can't give a specific percentage because you have to run the numbers in that way. If you're saying that we're standing static and we're not going to do a thing and we're not going to invest in our grid and so on and so forth, well, then clearly that percentage or that proportion is too high at the moment and it would need to come down. But my point on data centers is that it highlights the failure to invest in the grid and to do all of the deep public policy measures that we haven't been doing for 25 years or more. And it's been used as a scapegoat to cover that fact up. We shouldn't have this problem. We shouldn't be in a situation where we have to basically say it's data centers or no data centers. So I hope that answers your question.
Okay, thank you for that. We have a question up here. If we can get a microphone to the fourth row. Have we got a second microphone? Oh yeah, so if we can get one here, and I'll take another second question at the same time. Down the back here in the back, no, back the other way, sorry. And the second row in, I think it is. And we just have two mics, do we? Yeah, okay, let's take 1 and 2 here. Thank you. So go first.
Will I go first? So I'm Jay. I'm with Aubrey here. This question is not up for a specific candidate, but everyone, whoever wishes to take it up. So the question is, the Seanad was nearly disbanded over 10 years ago, and it has been described by some as a retirement home for failed politicians. How will you, as candidates, change this perception?
Okay, so Seanad reform, and I'll take the second question down the back here as well at the same time. Yeah.
Hello, my name's Luke. I'm here canvassing for Alicia de Bruyne. My question is for sorry, Sapone, Catherine Sapone.
Catherine, yeah.
My name's Luke. I'm a female. I'm a transitioned female. I attended the gender recognition review bill in 2016. My input was ignored due to people in society didn't want their biological sex to be recognised. In 2023, I was misdiagnosed and rushed to and hospitalised in A&E. I'm epileptic, and for those of us who can't sometimes verbally declare that we're our sex that we're not, I'm wondering if there's any ideas that you have maybe to have legal sex recognised, biological sex recognised, along with legal gender recognition, and just to guarantee our those of us who do medically transition our medical safety. Plus, also just a question: do I have the right to ask for a biological female woman as my doctor? Thanks.
Okay, thank you for two different questions there. So the first on Seanad reform, it wasn't directed to any particular candidate. So I've show of hands there. And the second one is to you, Catherine Zapone. So Lynn,
thank you.
Go for it.
I think obviously we need to reform the Seanad, and I think most people agree with that by now. The problem is it is like getting turkeys to vote for Christmas when it comes to the government parties, because they say they're for reform, but when reform is on the table, like it has been time and time again, they don't actually then bring it to fruition, and that's a real problem. But in terms of my own work in the Seanad, because that reform hasn't happened, and we'll continue to fight for that, but what we have tried to do in the civil engagement group, myself and my colleagues, is how can we have a relationship inside the chamber and outside the chamber so that we can have those furthest from politics feeding into the policies that we make. So if it's spent convictions, I work with people with convictions from the very first line that's written in a piece of legislation. The same on drugs policy. Every single committee that I'm on, I make sure that there's representation right throughout, from those who use a service to those who run a service. So I think some of us have tried to reform how we do things while we're in there, but that shouldn't be the answer, because we should be expanding the franchise to everyone.
Thank you. Try and be brief, Hazel Chu, because we have a lot of questions coming in online.
Just very brief. It's funny because when De Valera set up, he kind of envisioned it as a retirement home almost for politicians, and that's not what it grew to be. What it grew to be is the upper house that's scrutinised legislation. However, it's forever stacked because we have 11 Taoiseach appointees. So the whole system needs to be changed, that people, the public, vote for who goes to be in the Seanad, not the panels, not just the universities, but the public. And that is a constitutional change we need to start bringing in, and perhaps we need to propose for a referendum to bring in. And the government might not know like that, but that's up to us to demand it as well.
Thank you, Aubrey.
When you think of the likes of David Norris, who retired this year, and what he did, and he was the vanguard for LGBT rights, etc., and Fergal Quinn and John Crown, what they brought to the table, I do believe that the Seanad is a sleeping giant. But I do also question the reform, which is happening, and it's widening, as Linda said, to all universities. I welcome that. However, to have the 43, the panel senators being elected by 1,000 individuals who are TDs and senators, I find that disappointing, and we need to look
look at that.
Okay, Catherine Zappone, I know you want to come in on Seanad reform, but you might also take Luke's question, the second one.
Which one will I take?
We take Seanad, and
Okay,
then
I'll take Seanad. I was part of the first, was part of a group with Fergal Quinn and others who actually developed a bill in 2013 on Seanad reform, and we use that as the basis for a campaign called Democracy Matters, and that is the reason that the Seanad was saved. I would agree. I would now see that there's a new Seanad reform bill, newish. It's 2020. Lynn and others have worked on that. That needs to be implemented so that every citizen has a vote. But I think we need to do some campaigning, as distinct from simply just offering the reasonable arguments in order to get this done, as we did before. And the other thing I'd say is there's a little glimmer of hope that, because when we put forward our bill in 2013, Fianna Fáil put forward a bill that was very similar in terms of reforming the Seanad. And, so my first stop would be the Taoiseach's office.
And to the second question.
Perhaps the second question, thank you for your courage in asking that question this evening. And what I would say is that, there was, as you participated in that review of the Gender Recognition Act, there are recommendations in order for us to move it forward. We need to, my own view is that we should implement those recommendations, but perhaps because it was a while ago that report came out, we need to get some more consultation on issues that you have raised, for example, and before we move forward to and modernize our Gender Recognition Act.
Okay, thank you for the questions so far. I'm going to go to online questions. While I do that, give me a show of hands and we'll get microphones to you so we're ready to go here up the front. Online, Marie Stamp wants to know, Jack Mulcahy, what's behind the hat, basically, to summarise her question. What message does he hope to convey to the public by wearing it?
Women just find it terribly attractive. What can I say? Orby's been trying to take it off me all night.
Okay, let's see. Okay, so Sarah O'Reilly asks, question on hate speech legislation. With the new government, we can we expect the return of hate speech legislation? How will you vote and why? Anyone want to lead out on hate speech legislation? Lynn, Hazel, and then Derek. So
I think it's important to say we haven't seen what's going to reproduce to say how we would vote on it. I think the idea of hate speech legislation was an important conversation at the time. Unfortunately, how the legislation was drafted then, there was some serious holes in it in terms of the implications of how it would be implemented. You can't have a system whereby you have academics or senators or TDs having a right to use a particular language. But then if you were in a community where you use a particular language, you could actually be imprisoned or receive a conviction for that. So there's some real discrepancies in it. So I don't think I can say how I would vote until I actually seen that lots of those discrepancies that were quite clearly in what was pulled out were actually dealt with.
Okay, thank you, Hazel Chu.
I was one of the people who launched the hate speech legislation back 5 years ago, and I sit on the National Anti-Racism Advisory. And I can tell you that there are many groups, especially in marginalised communities, who would like to see hate speech legislation enacted. But again, to Lynn's point, it needs to be fit for purpose. And right now, what needs to happen is scrutinising existing legislation or proposal of new legislation forward, because the 1989 Act, as it was, is not fit for purpose. There was only five prosecutions under the 89 Act, and they showed that it is not fit for purpose, since the hate speech and also hate crime has risen by 10 votes.
Okay, thank you, Derek.
Well, as a journalist, I'm someone who has experienced hate speech firsthand and terrible violent threats. But although some of my friends were involved in the hate crime debate and the hate speech debate, I was reticent about the hate speech part of it, because one of the things I was worried about, and particularly as a journalist who writes an opinion piece, I was worried about who decides what hate speech is. Would I run the risk of being accused of hate speech when in fact that was not my intention at all? And having experienced that, I had a bit of concern in that regard. I think we have a long way to go before we understand what it is we mean and understand by hate speech.
Okay, thank you for that. Thank you for those two questions online. I'm going to go back to the audience in person here. We have two mics. I'll take them together. Where are our mics here and here? I'll take one and then the second person, please. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Matthew Butt. I'm a campaigner for Derek Byrne. And I just wanted to ask a question more broadly to the whole panel regarding, there hasn't been much talk in the hustings so far about action on LGBT rights. and specifically trans rights, which are a huge part of our national debate today. And as we're seeing so much vehement transphobia and vehement homophobia coming into the national vocabulary, as it were, the national language, with the rise of the far right. And I just wanted to ask, what do you plan to do about that, about the LGBT rights and the problem we have with them in our country today?
Okay, thank you for the question. I'll come for show of hands in a minute. And where is our second microphone? Here. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak. My name is Gavin Bush. I'm just representing myself as a BES graduate. I'd like to ask the panel, particularly Catherine Zappone, for their opinion on what they could do to make abortion a rare occurrence in Ireland, because as we all know, in the 2018 referendum that was passed, it was passed, in my view, on the basis that abortion will be safe, legal and rare. However, since 2018 was passed, abortion has been a rate of over 6,000 babies per annum, which I don't think anyone could argue is rare. So what would the politicians do, particularly Catherine Zappone, who was the chief architect of that referendum, what would they do to ensure rareness in abortion?
Okay, have your question. Thank you for that. Okay, on the first question, LGBTQI plus rights, who wants to lead out there? Maybe someone different to who we heard in previous questions. Anyone want to start us off? Marcus.
I think it's interesting on an issue that I suppose is a bit of a spiritual successor to those faced by David Norris. No one jumps to the fore. I, through this campaign, have been peppered left, right and centre with questions, really the only one that's been asked in terms of email and on the telephones. And it's quite interesting. I've talked to different people. I've, tried to do as much research as possible. I've come to the conclusion that there's actually very little research on it, and that we have a lot of... And
it being just specifically...
trans issues.
Okay,
trans
you're talking trans rather than... The question here is specifically to LGBTQ plus rights.
It seems to be driven by misconceptions. People have very strong viewpoints on it. And it strikes me that what we need to do is we need to actually, properly research and assemble what the topics are, what the issues are. We need to form a citizens' assembly, which is what I think we should be doing on it. That's what I would be calling for. And we need to consider carefully what all these, people, what the issues are, what people want, what are the, options before us, and come to some sort of a conclusion that we can actually then have a structured and objective debate around. That's how we've dealt with these complex issues before. But firing questions at random politicians, with sort of very, one side or another side question, I don't think that's going to get us anywhere.
Okay, thank you for that. Anyone else want to come in on the broad question LGBTQ rights? Hazel, and please be brief. Lynn, I'll let you in as well, and then Catherine, I'm going to come back to you on the question of abortion.
Yeah, I think the issue is already there, has been voiced, and said speaker has been asking about what protections we're putting in place. The various LGBTQ plus groups have asked, they want better healthcare, they want better support. These are all basic fundamental human rights issues, and that is no different to any of ours. It comes back to equality, and that's what's being asked by the group. But to then the second questioner's question about abortion, again, it's a woman's right to choose. That was what was voted on, and that was what passed by a majority of 70-odd%. So,
okay, thank you, Hazel. Lynn Rowan.
Yeah, I think it's very important as well that we, use person kind of forced language. Like saying the trans issue is a very uncomfortable thing because it's framing something as an issue instead of people's lived realities and experiences of life. What we need to be asking about is access to justice, access to healthcare, access to education. And if as a minority or marginalised or more vulnerable group, you are more affected by that because of your orientation, sexuality, race, whatever it may be, well, then we address the access issues and we don't keep calling individuals issues or their orientation issues, but the actual barriers and blocks that are in people's way to living safely. And everybody should be able to live safely, regardless of how they choose to live.
Very briefly, Aubrey, before I come back to you, Catherine.
I absolutely agree with Lynn there. And when you think of Ireland, it used to be a judgmental country. It's not as judgmental as we once were. However, there's a lot more ground to cover. And I will say with the seat, as Derek has mentioned, with David Norris, who was the vanguard for LGBT, it's important that they're protected.
Derek, I'll let you in there briefly, and then Catherine. Did you want to come in?
Well, I've been a gay rights activist for over 40 years for over 40 years. And I think Lynn is right. It's about focusing on the issues. One of the issues I'm working on at the moment is safe spaces for members of the LGBT community who experience domestic violence and coercive control. We don't have any. And that is the problem. It's about addressing structural inequalities in the service provision that we have in this country, which is grossly inadequate for anyone who's a member of a minority group in this country.
Okay, thank you. Catherine Zabone on the second question in terms of abortion.
And I can't answer on the first?
Yes, briefly, because we're about to go to a break.
Exactly. I'd love to I'd love to be voted into the Seanad because I am a member of a minority group as a lesbian, and to bring that perspective, particularly in relation to the scrutinization of the hate speech legislation. And the other thing that people haven't mentioned is about the equal treatment of children of LGBT parents, that they are not completely equal in the sense that they can be fully recognized that both of their parents are their legal parents, and we need to change some acts in order to do that. In relation to your question, and thank you again for your courage to ask that, I guess what I would say is that it is my view that we do have less abortions now because of the legislation and because of the fact that women are able to exercise their right to choose.
Okay, thank you for that. There's been loads of questions coming in online. To say to our online audience, some of the things you've been asking, we will cover in the second debate. Thank you for your audience questions here as well. Please do give a warm round of applause to your candidates for that debate, for your pitches, for honestly answering questions so honestly. We are going to go to a short break outside. You have about 10 minutes for a comfort break. We're going to reset the stage here. We're coming back to a second debate with 7 other candidates. Please be back in here in 10 minutes as we do that reset. Thank you, one and all. Welcome back. Are we good to go with our online audience? Great. Thank you. And thank you to our interpreters. Okay, welcome back, everybody. Hopefully anyone in the audience was here for part 1, so you've an idea of how this goes, where we're going to get basically straight into debate after we introduce the candidates. We'll have them each do a minute of a pitch, and then into audience questions here in the room and online. You'll be glad to know I'm mixing up the topics. I'm not sticking with the same topics from part 1. So hopefully this debate will look and feel a little bit different. As I mentioned earlier, off stage earlier this evening, we just had all names into the hat. We have 16 candidates, one who could not make tonight. We're going to play his video towards the end, hence why we have 7 candidates in this second half of the debate, and we had 8 earlier. And the order in which they appear next to me is the order that they were pulled out for this second part of the debate. When it comes to the pitches later, we'll start in the reverse order. So to introduce you to your candidates, nearest to me you have Sive O'Neill. Beside Sive, we've got Senator Tom Clonan, followed by Paul Mulville, Leisha De Bruyne, we've got Kevin Byrne, we've got Oisin Smith, and then we have Áine Kerr. And I'm going to do my best to get better at pronouncing your beautiful name as we go through the night, Áine. So to kickstart, we're going to start with the topic of health. And I know I think all of the candidates here have mentioned mental health in their manifestos, but I might go a little bit broader first, and that's to you, Tom Clonan. You talk in your manifesto and on your website about making it a legal requirement to provide treatments, therapy, supports and services to disabled citizens, and you say at present Ireland is the only country in the European Union where there is no such legislation. What is it going to take to have legislation of that nature carried through potentially the Seanad and into the Dáil?
Thank you very much. And I just want to thank our previous panel. What a panel. And to just compliment and congratulate everybody for putting themselves forward. It's not easy. Look, in relation to health and the question, Ireland, we're outliers in the European Union. Ireland is the worst country in the European Union to be disabled, to have an acquired brain injury, to be seeking stroke rehab, or just simply to be elderly. And one of the fundamental differences between Ireland and our European Union partners is that we don't have any legislation that gives disabled citizens people who have had a life-limiting or a life-altering event, they don't have a legal right to personal supports, to surgeries. We have thousands of Irish children, my son included, who were left to languish on spinal surgery waiting lists with life-limiting and life-altering outcomes, suboptimal outcomes. We have tens of thousands of Irish disabled children who can't get appropriate school places, who can't get physiotherapy, who can't get speech therapy, who can't, like, these are basic issues in other parts of the European Union. We can, even in Trump's America, with the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990, US citizens with disabilities have greater rights and access to services and supports than Irish disabled citizens. And the pathway to rectifying this is, I'm only elected 2.5 years, but I did progress my Disability Rights Bill of 2023. And even though there was an instruction from Cabinet to have that struck down, I managed to persuade my colleagues in government to actually renege on that instruction and progress my legislation right through to its final stage. I have also drafted and introduced a Disability Personalised Budgets Bill, a very large, complex piece of legislation that will transform and give control to healthcare to disabled citizens. And that's what a parliament is for. That's what we legislate for. It's to move us from a charity-based model to a fundamental human rights-based model of provision for disabled citizens. And when that happens, it will benefit everybody in this room. The World Health Organization tells us that every single human being will experience disability for on average of about 8 years of our life, often towards the end of life. But this will benefit every single person here.
Thank you. And I'm going to have others pick up on the topic of disabilities. Sive O'Neill, the other big topic within health that is coming up repeatedly in the various different manifestos is around mental health. And can you talk out about a little bit about some policy-specific supports that you would like to see introduced if you were elected to the Seanad? What would you campaign for that is different when it comes to mental health today?
Thank you very much, Áine. It's lovely to be here and to see everybody showing up for us. It really is a privilege. Health is obviously an important issue in any political debate, but mental health never seems to get the attention it deserves. Even during the election, there was very little attention paid to the fact that we have committed over time to make 10% of the annual health budget available for mental health, but it's never delivered, it's never implemented. At the same time, mental health crises are more commonplace. Mental health issues are particularly prevalent in young people and in the student population. The USI, for example, has been calling for a much greater ratio of student to counsellor provision, but that's only the tip of the iceberg. We need to reform and fund CAMS. There's whole areas of the country that don't have adequate child mental health services. And when those services are available to children and young people, they are transformative because they kind of hold their hands all the way through different stages, getting them to return back to school or back to college. As a lecturer, I have seen the effect of stress, of the housing crisis, of long commutes, and just general life stress on young people. And it comes to the point where they often drop out of courses that they're perfectly able to do because of all those stress. So mental health provision is a safety net, but it doesn't actually fix the problem. You need to provide the other services, including the affordable housing and better public transport. But mental health provision is woefully underfunded in Ireland, and getting that 10% provision in place would be a very basic start.
Paul, could you pick up there? I know mental health and supports and services is something you talk about in your own manifesto. Do you agree with that position on the 10%?
Yeah, very much. In terms of healthcare, just to mention, I've just spent the last few days in the Coombe with my partner Peo, where she gave birth to her first child, her son, on Saturday. And just
congratulations. You're seeing it up firsthand?
Firsthand, and the amazing staff there and the whole healthcare service, absolutely wonderful and fantastic, and lovely to see so many Trinity College students working there, and it's really just an amazing experience. And all they're both very well and doing very well. But just talking to some of the people working there, like really, as I've mentioned, the housing situation affects healthcare workers in a very serious way. And I'm from Portrane in North County Dublin, where you have the new National Forensic Mental Health Service Hospital, which is unable to open to its full capacity because they can't recruit people, because people can't afford to live in Dublin, healthcare and allied staff. And at the same time, you have a massive vacant old psychiatric hospital sitting beside it. And as a county councillor in Fingal County Council, I've been trying to push the government to provide funding to provide subsidised accommodation in that empty old hospital, in that empty building sitting right beside the new hospital for healthcare and allied staff, so they can come and work in a new hospital. It's just daft that it's sitting there empty for so long. Does that make sense?
Okay. Leisha de Bruyne, to bring you in there on health. I know one of the specific ideas in your own manifesto is that no child should, quote unquote, age out of early interventions or face years of delays for critical surgeries. Is this something that you've seen when dealing with parents as you've been out on the campaign trail, that this age out issue in the health system? Do we have a microphone for you? Yeah, good. Thank you.
I think it's unconscionable in this day and age, and with a surplus as we do have, that we are allowing children to age out of very simple therapeutic interventions, be that support services for ADHD, for autism, for learning, special needs within learning, because this puts a huge strain on parents, on mothers, and in classrooms. But also, I think it's wrong that children who have scoliosis are essentially the window of operating on that child is being missed. We are an outlier in this regard, and it is absolutely wrong with the surplus that is not being addressed. It needs to be addressed immediately. In terms of mental health more broadly, it's very clear that CAMHS exist, but it's underfunded and overstretched. And we also have an issue with ideological capture within our health services. For instance, our neighbouring jurisdiction, and indeed Northern Ireland, England and Wales, have all banned puberty blockers. We don't need an investigation into this. We need to simply ban them in this country. I have been writing to HICA, the Minister for Health, HSC, and the Department of Health since 2020 to alert them of the dangers of puberty blockers. Puberty blockers and transition more widely are at best in experimental medicine. At worst, you're talking about irreversible damage done to healthy bodies of young people who 9 times out of 10 will turn out to be gay, lesbian, or bisexual. So we need to talk about transitioning of children, both social and medical, and what that is doing to their mental health. With regard to transitioning, quite often teachers will especially come to me and say they are terrified of how to deal with this issue, with the huge burgeoning numbers of young people who have gender distress and gender questioning. What we need in Ireland is a properly resourced system and healthcare system where they can have proper psychotherapy. I'm a criminal barrister, and I can tell you, I work in criminal law, and quite often it's not unusual in this country for someone to first access psychotherapy when they are in prison.
Okay, we'll come back. There's lots there. I'm going to bring the others in. If I can bring you in, Kevin Byrne. I know one of the things you're advocating for in your own manifesto is a directly elected mayor to revitalise Dublin. Do you think a directly elected mayor in Dublin would have any say over health policies, but also where and what hospitals need to be built? Or do you think what is currently being built by the government when it comes to a new children's hospital will suffice?
So good evening all. Yeah, health is a very broad topic, and as a senator, I think you have to be realistic. You're not going to be able to address all aspects of it. Having been born with only one hand, I have some perspective on disability issues, which I think I'd bring to the Seanad if elected. And I do work in a school of medicine where I work on genomics, so issues like genetic testing for rare diseases and genetic counselling is something I'd like to see more of. And I'm a yeast and fungal researcher, so issues like antifungal resistance and antibiotic resistance is a type of specialist area I'd work on in the Oireachtas. But thank you for raising Dublin. That's one of the key issues I'm running on. And the real problem we have in this great city that's hosted the college for 400 years is that nobody is accountable to the running of it. And so I'm looking for a directly elected mayor to address that. This idea first emerged from the Citizens' Assembly in 2022. Where 100 people from around the city were invited to weigh this up, and they came out strongly in favour of a direct elected mayor model, which is the standard in other global cities. And health was one of the areas that was to come under that. So in Irish local governments, health is not something that traditionally comes under local authorities, but it would be normal in big cities around the world that health would come in. And I think particularly at community level care, when you're talking about how do people retire, how they're looked after in retirement, that's a model be very commonly involved in local government and other jurisdictions, and we should have here. So the key issue with Dublin, as I say, is about the lack of accountability, and a directly elected mayor is how we do that. And what I've discovered being involved in city and community politics and serving on city committees is that power in Ireland is very, very centralised. And so why I'm running for the Oireachtas is to be able to try and drive the idea of directly elected mayor in Leinster House, where I think that conversation has to be driven.
Okay, thank you. Oisin Smith, to bring you in there, we're seeing unprecedented levels of investment in the health system. But is it just being misspent when we look at, again, this January overcrowding in hospitals, when we see overspends on hospitals? Like, if you were elected to the Seanad, would you bring a different narrative, a different campaign, a different voice to what's required in terms of health spending?
Thank you, Áine, and good evening, everybody. Yes, there has been a 50% increase in spending in the healthcare system in Ireland. I mean, it's been over the course of the last 5 years. There's been an enormous increase, and yet my experience directly of going to emergency is waiting all night to be seen by a doctor. So clearly, at the point of entry, and particularly in emergency services, things are still very, very bad for patients and for citizens. Basic thing that I noticed was missing from our healthcare system during the pandemic was any kind of data about our citizens' health. I think the National Car Test Service has better information about the car fleet than the HSE has about the public. One of the only centralised healthcare systems that has information about everybody in the country is the vaccination system that was knocked up extremely quickly. That project went much better because it was constrained and it had to happen quickly. If we allowed the normal course of events for the HSE, they would have taken years and delivered something very ineffective. The HSE is going to deliver an app which is going to go on your phone, which everybody's going to have, and it's going to have your prescription on it and all the kind of information that is absolutely normal in other countries in Europe. That's going to happen in the next month or two. That's what I worked on for the last 2 years, but it shouldn't have taken this long. There is an institutional problem in the HSE. They are a dysfunctional organisation. Everybody in government knows that. Everybody, I'm sure, in Ireland knows that. They are massively funded, and yet they are not producing what they should.
Okay, thank you for that, Oisin Smith. To bring you in, Áine, I know what you're thinking a lot about in your own manifesto is going back to mental health and well-being, but particularly some of the stresses and strains that you see placed on students going through the system, graduates coming out into the world of looking for work and back to housing that we talked about earlier. Like, if you were elected to the Seanad, what are specifically 1-2 things that you would like to do in the area of health, well-being, mental health?
Thank you, and thank you everybody for being here this evening. I have spent most of my adult time even as a student, so I am still continuing to study. So this is a first-hand experience for me, not just watching and seeing students in general. I also have children who are a Trinity graduate and current Trinity students, so I know firsthand the stress and the mental health issues that come from that due to inadequate funding. First of all, if elected to the Seanad, the first thing I will advocate for is for the removal of the €2,000 contribution. So, and it shouldn't be means-tested. The Exchequer funding can take care of that, because that will put that €2,000 back into the pocket of students. That means they would not have to spend so many hours working odd jobs or part-time jobs, because this is what is affecting students' mental health. They go to classes during the day, they work at pubs and all kinds of odd jobs in the night. They close at 3 a.m. sometimes, and they don't get much sleep because they have to be back to college in the morning. Some of them are doing science-based courses, medicine, they cannot afford to cut classes. So it's important. And from my own experience from Nigeria, when I attended University of Lagos in 1989, we did not pay anything at all. Education to the university level was free. It is still free in Federal University in Nigeria. These are countries that we look down upon as being developing country. If Nigeria can do it, I do not see why Ireland cannot even do much better. Secondly, I will talk about the issue of accommodation. Student accommodation is as high as €1,000 or more. When I went to the University of Lagos, first of all, accommodation on campus is compulsory for every first-year student. And in your final year, it's also compulsory. You get your accommodation in those 2 years. In between, you might be lucky, you know. But it is the cost of the accommodation. I remember very clearly when I started, the cost of my accommodation for the entire year was less than 1/3 of my pocket money for a month. So we really need to cost the cost of accommodation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Áine. Would anyone like to come back and follow up on anyone's points there? Yes, I go first.
Student accommodation. One of the barriers has been the fact that the TUs can't actually borrow money in order to build their own on-campus accommodation, and that has been an obvious deficiency in the way the higher education system is structured at the moment. And when I was campaigning in Waterford and during the general election, it was a major plank of all of the higher education bodies in the area. But nationally, it's a real problem. And the other thing is that it was mentioned earlier in the other panel that a lot of the build-to-rent accommodation is focused on students, but that doesn't make it affordable. It's completely unaffordable. It is an access issue. It's a huge barrier for students that are paying that €2,000 just to access the course, to then have to front up those kind of fees. And the leases are very restrictive, meaning that they don't have guaranteed accommodation year on year. So students are being caught in every way by the housing crisis, but I don't think the universities are adequately equipped to respond. And we're relying on the state and the private market to step up when in fact the campuses and the universities should be taking the lead.
Okay, and keep rooting it back in just health so we don't re-rehearse some of the arguments from housing earlier, but I can see what you're talking about there. SIVE is ultimately onto mental health and stress and strain. You wanted to come in there, Paul.
Well, just very briefly, just in terms of student mental health, I mean, the student counselling service in Trinity, for example, absolutely fantastic. I made use of it myself when I was in college. It was a fantastic help, and the likes of that needs to be free and available to students and to remain so. In terms of student housing, for example, the college owns a residential zone land in Santry in the Fingal County Council area, zoned for student accommodation for over 14 years now. Never been built, and the student accommodation there has never been built. That's a massive issue. Like we have 14 billion, for example, from the Apple windfall. Why isn't some of that money used to ring fence and to build low-cost student accommodation, for example, and the Trinity's land in Santry?
Okay, thank you for that, Paul Mulville. I had a show of hands. Oisín, go first there, and I'll bring everyone in with a show of hands. Thank you, Oisín.
Well, hospitals tell me that they have great lack of accommodation for their staff. Their staff are commuting very long distances. Every hospital should be building accommodation on its property if possible, and that could be funded with the land hoarding tax revenue, which is going to start coming in next month.
Okay, thank you for that, Kevin Byrne. You want to come in there as well?
Just to follow up on that, I was an outside member of the city's housing committee for 3 years, and one of the things I'm proud of we got working on that was adaptive reuse, where we take unused commercial buildings and repurpose them as residential. And one obvious use case for that is things like accommodation for healthcare workers in the city. And that's something that I'd like to supercharge in the Seanad. It's happening. There's a small pipeline, but that's something that is much quicker than new builds. It's much more realistic than we've all talked about over the shops for decades, but there's a lot of regulatory challenges with that. But this is taking whole unused commercial buildings and turning them into accommodation, an awful single household accommodation, which is where the greatest demand is.
Tom Clonan, you want to come in there?
Yeah, I just want to be really clear on the disability issue. And I've been to the Coombe 5 times, and it's a great service. But if you're pregnant in Ireland and you go to a maternity hospital, you will be treated. You will be scanned, and notwithstanding all of the challenges, you'll be brought to a delivery suite and assisted, or you can have choice around whether you have a home birth. If, God forbid, anyone here has chest pain, notwithstanding the challenges, Oisín, in A&E, you will be seen, you will be scanned. If you need stents, you'll get them. If you have cancer, you'll get treatment from an oncologist. But if you are a disabled child in Ireland, you have no guarantee of getting a therapy within the therapeutic window. You have no guarantee, we know, of getting absolutely life-changing spinal surgery. So we actually have a crisis in this country, and we have serious questions to answer. I was told by visiting US surgeons who came here for a conference last month in relation to the spinal surgery waitlist. They said if you were to get Irish disabled children and put them onto an Airbus or a Boeing and fly them to Vancouver or Boston or any of the centres of excellence in the UK, there would be an international medical outcry. They would want to know, how were these children allowed to deteriorate to this point where some of them have become permanently disabled unnecessarily? Some have lost their lives.
This is the scandal of our age. And if I am re-elected, I will hold the government's feet to the fire on this, as I've done for the last 2.5 years. It is, I believe, we're told, it's rumoured, it's part of the discussions on the negotiation of a new government, that disability is high on the agenda. But mark my words, we are international outliers. And what makes these children and young adults different? They're disabled. That is a serious question that this country has to answer.
Okay, I'm going to move to our second topic, which is climate, the green agenda, sustainability issues. And Sive O'Neill, I know you're campaigning on a lot of climate issues. You're proposing that if elected to the Seanad, you would propose amendments to the climate law to strengthen requirements. I think you're also looking for mechanisms that would make some of these legally binding targets more enforceable. Can you just give us one or two very tangible, practical ideas of what you would legislate for differently?
Well, that's really interesting, because the area of the law that I would be looking at is actually Section 15. And this is the section that was litigated most recently in the case that you might have read about called Cool Glass. And it was a renewable energy project in County Laois that was turned down by Bord Pleanála. The developers appealed it, and the High Court just decided this week, or a week ago, that in fact the Bord Pleanála erred in law by not giving priority to the climate law, in particular Section 15 of the Act. And the judge also criticised the state for its interpretation of that section of the Act. Now, this is a really important judgment. It may yet go to the Supreme Court, but what it does, it establishes in law the primacy of the climate law over other objectives and policies of the state. And of course, that's set out in the law itself. It sets a clear objective that Ireland must transform to a climate neutral, biodiversity friendly, all the rest of it, by no later than 2050. So that's the pathway we're on. And the law also builds in carbon budgets, sectoral emission ceilings, and 2030 targets, which in turn are dovetailed and synchronized with EU law. So in every way, the state is obligated to act on climate and to deliver our targets. But in fact, that's not what's happening. And the problem that I see with Section 15 is, notwithstanding the Cool Glass judgment, there is still a lacuna in that public sector bodies are not interpreting their obligations correctly. I speak as a recused member of a state board, so I know what I'm talking about. Most of the state boards are looking at climate action mandates that Oisin's department would have instructed them to produce, that set out their strategies for what are called Scope 1 and 2 emissions. They're direct and indirect emissions, but they don't deal with the Scope 3 emissions. But that isn't the right way to be looking at the role of state bodies in respect of the climate law and climate policy. And it is an area that needs amendment. And by the way, this is critical to the achievement of everything in the Climate Action Plan. If you can't get public transport and transport bodies to invest in the right infrastructure at the right time and have those pipelines and projects, you won't achieve the targets. So the operation of those companies is vital.
Okay. Thank you, Sive O'Neill. Oisin, I'll bring you in there just to respond to Sive's points, but also, you know, you look at reports tonight, it seems like we're getting closer to government formation. Some might argue that there could be some green skeptics amongst it. Do you have concerns when you look at potentially government formation, when you look at European, US trends? We turn on our TVs and radios, LA fires, of just where the trend lines are going in terms of prioritisation. When you listen to Sive there about how legislative changes like that might actually get prioritised in reality.
Yeah, I know a lot of the people who are likely to form the next government, because I've had them try to explain to me why climate change isn't happening or why we should do nothing about it. So I am worried that those people are going to have influence in a new government that's starting next week. Your question earlier to Sive was, what legislation do we need? And actually, I don't think we do need a whole lot of new legislation. A raft of legislation was passed that puts obligations on every state agency to bring in a climate action plan and to reduce their emissions all the way across their organisations. And what has to happen now is they have to be forced to do that. They're legally required to. Every sector is required to reduce their emissions. But who is going to make them do that? Who is going to put those ministers in front of them and say, you have a legal requirement to do this. Your agencies are not doing this. Your organisations are not doing this. I know of state agencies that are not taking their public sector mandate seriously. It won't happen unless they are actually put in front of somebody who cross-examines them and who passionately wants them to do their job.
Okay, thank you, Oisin Smith. Kevin Byrne, to bring you back in and maybe back to our directly elected mayor concept that you're campaigning on the idea of revitalising Dublin, a clean, green, safe and globally vibrant city, to quote your own manifesto. Where do you fall in this debate at the moment? You know, some arguing for build more bicycle lanes and others saying, no, it's road infrastructure. Is there a balance to be struck, or are we headed into a period of these binary choices about where investment should play out?
Well, in the broader scheme of things, bike lanes are not that expensive as infrastructure point of view. I've been an e-bike commuter for over 20 years, so I'm a little bit biased in this discussion. And I think that's actually a mode of transport we don't get talked about enough in an urban environment. So there's a lot of talk about electric vehicles, but those are big, heavy vehicles that still take up a lot of road space. And for getting around a city like Dublin, where the core is quite compact, e-bikes should be a much bigger part of the solution than we see currently. So that's a broadening of the conversation I'd like to see, and something I would raise if elected. So I don't see as a huge conflict. You know, there is a move away from cars in city centres. There's been some pain about that. But I think the consensus is the consensus finally settling that it does improve our cities. And so at the front of this great college, we have the project for College Green to pedestrianise that plaza. That's long overdue. It's the type of thing that I think if we had a directly elected mayor would have happened by now, because it would have been driven by that accountable person who was the figurehead of the city. It's been let drift for a long time. There's again new signs of something happening on that. But that's the type of thing that revitalises and changes cities. And the different cities have different experiences, say, coming out of COVID. If you look at Paris, where people live in the city, it came out of COVID as a much stronger, more vibrant, lived-in city, because people already lived there in enough scale to make it so. And so it has cycling infrastructure. The balance between bringing that in without frustrating car users was found. Our biggest problem in Dublin is it's not a lived-in enough city. We don't have enough people living in the city core. And we need to change that in order to advance all these conversations. To make it a really healthy, thriving global city, more people need to be living here. And I'd like to see some of them on e-bikes.
Paul Mulville, to bring you in on climate and green agenda. You talk on your website about addressing the climate and biodiversity emergency. If you were elected to the Seanad, what kind of urgency would you bring to this? Again, one or two tangible ideas that are different to what we've seen until now?
Well, as I mentioned, I'm from Portrane in North County Dublin. We've been at the coalface of the climate breakdown. We've had neighbours and friends' houses fall into the sea due to coastal erosion and flooding. It's a serious issue. It's not being addressed by government. There's been plans drawn up to put in place a scheme that will be, able to protect the habitat there, help that regrow, and also protect the homes and businesses. We've just seen a reaction from the state, much too slow to save houses and businesses at risk, to save the dune habitat infrastructure there. So too much, I think, lip service being paid to the climate breakdown, the climate crisis, and certainly I'll be, if I'm elected to Seanad, I'll be making that a key issue and keeping the pressure on whoever the next minister is to do something about it, and to actually get things done on the ground.
Thank you for that, Paul Mulville. Laoise de Bruin, to bring you in. I know in your own manifesto you talk about designating, a set percentage of corporation tax, or the Apple windfall, as it's been called, into education and other initiatives. Do you think there's a role here for, as you're thinking about a percentage of those funding that can play its part when it comes to climate, green policy, sustainability, or how we think about education for the public? And how would you spend some of that money on these initiatives?
Thank you. So firstly, with regard to children and climate change, I think it's unfortunate that young children today, quite often, I have 3 children, and it's not unusual for them to cry at nighttime because they've seen awful footage of floods, and they'll say, is that going to happen here? I think this is our burden and this is our responsibility, and it's nothing. Children should not have to carry that burden or that responsibility. It's our responsibility, in fact, to protect childhood as a developmental stage and not foist this onto children. With regard to some of the comments on the panel to do with pedestrianise the centre of the city, I mean, I think it's laudable and it sounds good and it makes us feel good, but all these other European cities have, of course, got an underground. We simply don't have the infrastructure. And with regard to everyone cycling everywhere, we don't have the climate. I think we need to be really practical. One of the parts of the sort of climate conversation is often about culling the suckler herd in Ireland. And I think farmers have been really vilified for far too long when it comes to climate change. We're not really having a conversation about new industries. For example, there's a terrifying carbon footprint from cryptocurrency, from data centers. And instead of we shouldn't be targeting farmers. Farmers are the custodians of the land. And they should be encouraged through legislation, if necessary, to switch away from industrial farming, which obviously includes chemicals, and toward a more regenerative model of farming where the biome, the soil biome and diversity is enriched once again, because we only have one Earth. And we have to have a shift in consciousness away from a purely profit-driven agenda towards us as custodians of this Earth.
Okay, thank you, Laoise de Bruin. Áine, to bring you in there, any thoughts on what you've heard so far, and even Laoise's point there about, adults taking responsibility here and having to advocate and push for the change we want to see in the world, and maybe protecting some of our younger people where, as Laoise says, it maybe gives very early anxiety to them. Thoughts on that? Go for it.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. So, yes, as adults, we should bear the responsibilities and not shed the load on the future generation or our children. So my thoughts would be in terms of cutting the emission. I was looking at the report of the the Fiscal Advisory Council in December, where they warned the government that we might have to incur up to 20 billion fines for not cutting our emission if we don't meet our target for cutting the emission by 2030. 2030 is just five years from here. And with all the challenges we're having with funding in education, funding in housing, funding in health, I will hate to see 20 billion euro go into fines. So we must really take all the concerted effort to make sure we cut emission. One way we need to cut that is focusing on the residential buildings, because our buildings are so old. Local authority, county council buildings are so old. They have not been renovated. They have not been, brought up to the right energy rating. So, and this lies at the door of the local authority. The Minister of Housing has responsibility to really make sure that they do something. Lynn was talking the last time about houses that are bonded up. These are not, the energy rating in those houses are very poor. The derelicts, even the houses that people are living in, are quite poor. So we really need to focus on that and take care of them. Thank you.
Tom Clonan, to bring you in, and then Si, will have you come back in. When we think about the carrot and stick approach, you can have all of the mandatory targets that's going to hopefully have this push legal requirements, to hit targets and think about our carbon emissions. Do we have to think about it in other ways in terms of the nudge and the public coming along with this? Do we need to think about green tax credits, something different that's going to get the carrot and stick approach balanced?
Well, I first of all have to declare a conflict of interest. Minister Smith here, he's my local TD. And I have received literature from the Green Party. And I commend the work of my colleagues in the Green Party. And I'm sorry to see so many lose their seats, so many good friends of mine. I saw Pauline O'Reilly in here earlier. I think of people like Malcolm Noonan. But I live 150 metres from the sea. And my Green colleagues tell me that by 2050, I could be underwater. And I'm talking now like SpongeBob SquarePants. And also, in my other sort of intellectual and professional formation as an international peacekeeper, I've seen directly the impacts of climate change in the Middle East. I was in a place called Al-Walid Al-Tanf on the border of Iraq and Syria, and saw 250,000 people under plastic sheeting. Many of them trying to escape conflict, but many across sub-Saharan Africa, trans-Saharan Africa, trying to escape the effects of climate change. And you're correct. It's something that is going to impact on us here. And we have to show leadership in that regard. And I'm a little bit dismayed in this century as a parent to now adult children to see the proliferation of conflict and the emphasis on spending on weapon systems and ammunition and the reification of violence as a means to solve conflict, the tearing up of the international humanitarian law rulebook, the challenge against the international rules-based order, and they are all interconnected. It's intersectional with the challenge we have on climate change. So I don't think it's something like, at this point, it's more than just a nudge or a carrot and stick approach. We absolutely must address this fundamental existential challenge to the survival of the planet and to our survival as a species. And the one primal root cause that I would identify is just hypercapitalism. We've had neoliberalism imperatives for so long. It's burning up the planet. It's driving a patriarchal and paternalistic system of leadership, like Putin, like Trump, like formerly Boris Johnson and Netanyahu. We need to move away from that and come up with a fundamental radical change in order to address the issues of climate change and the related question of international global conflict.
Okay, Sive O'Neill, you want to come back in?
I'm grateful to Tom for zooming out a little bit and appreciating the scale of the challenges that we face and the importance of international diplomacy. Because very often when you're discussing climate action, as we did this evening, it boils down into whether or not Ireland is a good place to cycle. I mean, you know, it gets incredibly petty very, very quickly, when in fact we need to appreciate the absolute urgency of reducing emissions in line with the science. And it is unfortunately sometimes rather dull that we have to keep repeating that point. But what the science is telling us is that climate change is actually accelerating above and beyond what was predicted in the IPCC models. We have every reason to be absolutely scared out of our wits. And it means that we have to upturn our political thinking and upend our thinking about taxation. And you asked an excellent question about whether we need new forms of incentives. One of the things we could do is introduce a windfall tax on those major energy users. Incidentally, all their data about how much energy they produce and use is secret. It's not publicly available, even though it's collected by them for their own purposes. So we have a major problem in that the people and the companies and the sectors that are contributing to the problem are still not facing the impact of effective legislation. And what we're going to see in future, if the state fails to act, is more litigation taken by children who, I mean, what else are people to do other than challenge the government and the state's lack of action? We have good framework legislation in place now, but if it's not implemented, the state is still liable for not implementing it correctly as is set out. And that is what's going to happen because the issues at stake are so urgent. And the recent cases, the Swiss grannies case, if you like, and there was another case taken at European level. These are all really indicative of where we are traveling. That climate breakdown is a human rights issue. It is turning into an arena of conflict. It is driving inequality, and it is driving wasteful expenditure on fossil fuels that are only heating the planet and driving exploitation.
Okay, thank you. Oisin Smith, to bring you back in, and probably I'm sure you were listening to everyone there, how much of this is sometimes a communication problem, a storytelling problem, where to truly have the message connect, it's futuristic. It feels so unknown and unknowable to this generation. And it's how you tell that story. Is that part of it, them understanding the problem, or is that just more, no, that's just a tactical excuse? Because we've seen some people who care desperately about this say, oh, it's communication.
I think if you put on the news, it's very immediate. You can see that Hollywood is burning. You know, I mean, it is something that's happening all the time, and it will keep happening repeatedly. That you'll put on the news, and you'll see that there are floods in Ireland. You'll see that there are weather events that can't be explained through normal cycles. It is something that's good, that is close to home, and it immediately affects you. And it affects you as when you're trying to commute, and you're trying to get public transport, or you're trying to heat your home. It is an immediate effect in people's lives. There is a problem that it has a longer term effect, and it's going to affect our children and our grandchildren. And sometimes it is harder to motivate people around that. But the college has a real role in this. Universities have a role in the research that's needed to combat the problems of climate change. And I think that is something that if I were a senator, I would work with the college and work with the government to try to make sure that the funding was there to deal with these problems.
Okay, thank you, Oisin Smith. I'm going to switch to our third and final topic for this panel, the second panel of the night, and that's to inclusion, diversity, integration. So I'm going to give it a broad umbrella that it could be for anything from back to some of the access issues we talked about, but to migration, immigration, and LGBTQ. So we're going to take a broad umbrella here so that everybody can contribute. And Áine, I know this is an area you really care about, particularly around the issue of integration. And you've talked about there is no representation for us without representation from us. And I know you're very passionate and want to be an advocate for greater integration. What do you think that looks like, and what do you think the lessons are that need to be learned from the last couple of years of particularly Ukrainians, people maybe from Gaza fleeing to Ireland, and of course countries globally, people seeking refuge here. So when it comes to that question of integration, what can we do differently? What are the lessons to be learned?
Thank you. In terms of the asylum seekers or people fleeing wars or places of conflict and coming in here, I think the first point of the integration should start from the very first time they step in. From the first time they have contact with the International Protection Office, the first 15 minutes interview that happens, I think that's the point where there should be, in my own point of view, there should be, even if it's a piece of paper containing basic information about Ireland, about our courtesies, the law, the custom, just to say, oh, this, like for example, the law, how domestic violence and things like that are frowned upon. Assault it's not allowed here, and even simple things as getting onto the, highlighting from the dart. I see, when I came here, first of all, many years ago, the first thing that struck me as the Irish courtesy is that everybody waits outside for people highlighting to get out first, and then they come in. So, and that has quickly been eroded recently. And I'm not saying it's just the newcomers, but people come from different backgrounds where people rush into darts, rush into trains. So just that simple courtesy of saying, this is what Ireland looks like, you are welcome here, I think that would be very useful. Access to services, simple men shared, job opportunities. I think simple information from the very first contact will be very useful. Also, I think we should try and get people into job as quickly as possible, because they are fleeing conflict, they are unsettled. I think giving them a sense of this is a job, it takes their minds off the different conflicts that they are coming from, opportunity to get into work, to meet colleagues, to begin to earn money, gives them a hope. Many of the asylum seekers, even those who are unmerited, they live for up to 3 years here before they are sent back. So that's it. So if they can kickstart jobs, and we have so many skills shortage, I think people can be interviewed very quickly, see what skills they have. And I mentioned that on my website about recognition of prior experience and prior education. We have so much skill shortage that people can be pushed into job immediately, if possible. I hate to see young lads or even older people roaming on the street, on O'Connor, Moss Lane, everywhere during the day. Idle hand is a devil's workshop. I would like to see people engaged as soon as possible.
Okay, thank you for that, Áine. Paul Mulville, maybe to bring you in there on some of those specific points. Do you think more could be done to ensure that people coming into Ireland, making it their home, can be integrated, can find a purpose, find employment, feel like they're really contributing to the local economy faster?
Well, I think we're seeing people now, as happened in the past, trying to win power through hatred, resentment, fear, to use people's fears to gain power. We've seen that, unfortunately, in our council, in Fingal County Council, someone from the far right elected to try to use people's concerns about housing to try and blame immigrants for that. Instead, what we need to do is, for example, again, I'm drawing on Fingal County Council because I'm aware of it, massive investment in the likes of Balbriggan, a very diverse young town, a lot of investment in the arts and culture, and making it a great place to live. Real serious investment in building communities where you have such a diverse population, and building on the strengths of those diverse communities, giving opportunities to young people to come together, to sing together, dance together, play together, and for people who are from different backgrounds to get to know each other and break down those barriers. And that's really where we need to see action from government. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Paul Mulville. So broadening out when we talk about inclusion, diversity, integration. Tom Clonan, I know a pillar of your own manifesto is gender equality. And gender discrimination and sexual violence. And we only need, again, look at headlines day to day. We see, unfortunately, an awful lot of domestic violence reports through recent days and weeks. Again, what do you think is required there from education initiatives to a rethink of maybe some of the legislative provisions and how we treat everything from domestic violence and sexual violence to gender discrimination?
Okay, so just so people know, in a previous life as a soldier back in the 90s, as a serving army officer, I did a PhD, a doctorate, and I looked at the experiences of my female colleagues in Óglaigh na hÉireann in the Defence Forces. And my research revealed shockingly high levels of sexual violence, sexual assault, up to including rape of my female colleagues. Now, in drawing attention to this, I found myself the target of a very robust campaign of reprisal. I was threatened with criminal prosecution. It was alleged that I'd breached the Official Secrets Act. I was told that a file would be sent to the Director of Public Prosecutions, and that I would lose my job, that I would go to prison. There was a lot of pushback to the idea that this is an enduring and recurring problem in all areas of Irish society. Now, it took 25 years, but now we do have a judge-led inquiry which is investigating the culture of our defence forces and making it as hopefully a safer place, not just for female soldiers, sailors and aircrew, but also young male soldiers who are also targeted in this way. Now, in recent weeks and in the run-up to Christmas, we've had several several women targeted, many in their own homes, by members of their own family or partners, and murdered. And this is something that we cannot allow this to remain unchallenged. But there is a problem in terms of how do we teach our young men to respect the fundamental rights of others. Now, in my time as a senator in the last 2 years, I've co-sponsored 3 bills on domestic violence. The Domestic Violence Amendment Bills 1, 2 of 2023 and 1 of 2024. I've also worked with the Higher Education Authority in trying to end gender-based violence and sexual harassment on our university campuses. This is a very it's in every area of Irish society. It's in Leinster House, it's here on campus. It's in every area of Irish society. And unfortunately, there is at the moment a brosphere, a manosphere that is pushing back on the idea that basically we need that this is, they're even denying that this is an actually a problem. And there are certain circles in which feminism has become almost like a dirty word. We need to make everybody a feminist in order to resolve this problem. And that's a conversation that has to involve boys and men, and not just...
Leisha, to bring you in there, because I know domestic violence is a key piece you've been thinking about, and it's in your manifesto, and you point out it's currently not a criminal offence. And with your legal hat, legal expertise, what are you advocating for there, if elected to the Seanad, and what you campaign for?
Well, in 2020, I founded an organisation called the Countess because, and the Countess is an organisation that protects the rights of women, children, child safeguarding, and the LGBT community. And the reason I founded the Countess was because of the Gender Recognition Act, we were sending males, biological males who identified as females, to female prison, to either Docus or the female wing of Limerick Prison. And these women, incarcerated women in Ireland, are dispossessed, they are othered, and they're the most vulnerable in society. And yet we are where we are because nobody in the Dáil could look around the corner when it came to this legislation. I have drafted legislation, I believe it to be the first in the world, which unlatches the gender recognition certificate from the prison rules, because we need to stop this loophole whereby males, even dangerous predatory males, are currently sent to female prison in Ireland upon identification as female. We've already had a situation in Ireland where one male was tried. Now, he was cleared, but he was tried of threatening to torture and rape not only a fellow inmate who was female, but also a female guard. With regard to my broader platform and my
bring it back to the domestic violence.
Yes, if I was lucky enough to be elected, I would like a reform of, for instance, our rape laws. We are an outlier insofar as we allow a statutory defence of an honest belief that the woman was consenting at the time of intercourse. In other jurisdictions, including England, Wales, and Northern Ireland, it must be the objective test, which is it cannot be unreasonable. It must be reasonable that you believed she was consenting. That must be reformed. There's been calls for reform for decades on that one issue. It is not currently a criminal offence. Domestic violence per se is not a criminal offence, which people will probably be shocked to find out, but it's the breach of the order that triggers a criminal offence. So currently it's a common law offence. And then I think there's a huge disconnect in terms of judicial policy, and it is based on case law, but of course we can legislate around this. We did so with rape, obviously, and we've made huge ground in terms of how we understand consent when it comes to rape. But currently in Ireland, if you are found in possession of child sexual abuse images, and I don't use the word child porn, these are abuse images and videos, and it's a strict liability with regard to this offence. So what that means is possession is the crime. The offence is made out. So typically you're talking about a plea of guilty. And even though there's a plea of guilty, you will not go to prison. You are not given a custodial sentence. There is a policy of fully suspended sentences for these crimes. These crimes have real victims. It doesn't matter if these children are from the global south or in countries far away. These victims matter too. And if I am lucky enough to be elected as a senator, I will speak up for the most vulnerable, even if that means challenging the status quo.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. I'm going to bring Sive O'Neill in, and I appreciate this is a broad umbrella that we've gone from kind of integration to equality, and we're then going deeper on some other issues. Sive, where do you want to pick up, Sive O'Neill?
I just want to maybe report some good news for a change, because there's a lot of proposals being bandied around for private members' bills, and you could fill a room in Leinster House with all the private members' bills that don't get past second stage. And it's absolutely critical that if you're elected to the Seanad, as I hope to be, that you can work with other senators and other members of the Oireachtas at committees and in other fora and form alliances to actually build consensus around particular issues. And one key development that we should be celebrating in Ireland is the introduction of gender quotas. And it was actually Ivana Bacik, who's over there, who I think was the rapporteur or something at some committee. And it was a committee process led by Ivana that resulted in the introduction of gender quotas. Now, these have had the effect of mandating 40% representation of women by political parties if they want to get state funding. It is 100% effective because political parties like to get money. So we need to introduce the same principle for local government, and that's easily done because we have a mechanism and we just need to replicate it. And secondly, we need to be thinking in terms of the role of a senator in actually building and forging those alliances. So while individuals can propose this, that, and the other piece of little tweak to this legislation and that, it's meaningless unless you have the capacity and the experience of building alliances and working together in a collaborative way to build on public policy expertise and get it over the line.
Okay, thank you for that, Sive O'Neill. Kevin Byrne and Oisin Smith, anything you'd like to come back in on? Kevin Byrne first. I'll give you a minute. Oisin, go first. Kevin.
Just on the immigration point, I think it's important that we've a fair and well-ordered system. So I work in a university research environment, so we see the benefits of migration to Ireland. And I think it's in our tech and pharma sectors, it's a unique selling point we have versus the UK or the US. So I think that that's just to say on that. And one thing we could possibly look at is guest worker programs to regulise some of the economic migration happening at the moment. That might be something worth looking at the next Oireachtas.
Thank you for that, Kevin Byrne. Oisin Smith.
Just about diversity in teams. I was in charge of national cybersecurity for the last few years, and one thing that was very clear is that a team of people who all come from the same background is much weaker than a mixed team. And it was for that reason that we got female role models from different ethnicities, sent them out to girls' schools to encourage young women and girls to take part, to qualify, and to take up careers in cybersecurity so that they would join those teams, so they would be stronger. So it wasn't for the sense of being politically correct, it was because we would get a better outcome as a result of diversity. And I know that the university is going to do better research with diverse teams of people, not just different gender, different ethnicity, also different social class, different age. Getting all those people together gives you a strong team.
Okay, thank you for that, Oisin Smith. Áine, you started here and I'm going to give you the final word. Áine Oluburdre. Sorry.
That's great. Thank you so much. I just want to take the opportunity to highlight the fact that people from migrant background were currently 25% of the Irish population. And that when I contested in 2022, we were just over 20% at that time. So it's going to increase the percentage of the Irish population. So it is important that we have political representation at the parliamentary level, and it's long overdue. And I will stress the fact that for many centuries, the Trinity College they have educated people from migrant background from all the four corners of the earth. And today, none of them have had the opportunity to stand and be part of the Seanad. But I am here today and I'm taking the opportunity to say that we have the opportunity to elect me at this time, because not only do I represent these thousands of people from all this generation, but I can do the work as a practicing barrister who is qualified to practice in both across the border, and that reflects in my priority. Also, importantly, the skills shortage, because my equality, diversity, and inclusion is not just about the migrant people, but also the Irish people whose parents emigrated from Ireland years back. I met a lot of Irish Americans when I went to Boston in 2018, and they really want to come back, but they have restriction around the requirement for the habitual residents before they can access social services. So I'm speaking for all those, the elderly and everybody.
Thank you, Áine. So catch a breath, because you're going to have to go first with your pitch now in a moment. So we're doing it in the reverse order in which we started the questions. For those of you who were here earlier, they get a minute each now. At the 30-second moment, we're going to get a bell here, you're there. So don't be put off too much by the first bell. At the 60-second mark, try and wrap or we will cut your mic. So Áine, you're first, off you go.
Okay, thank you. So I'll just start from where I stopped. So I've lived here for over 20 years, practicing in the Bar of Ireland, and a member of the Bar of the Northern Ireland, an accredited mediator, a lecturer, and a mother of 3 children. This is the only place we know as home. I have worked here, studied here, and raised my family. I have contributed even to pro bono services. I have behind me over 30 years of professional career in banking, in financial services, in government. So I bring on board all these experiences to be able to contribute to parliamentary debate about legislation, to scrutinize legislation, to bring private members' bill, and to advocate for a better Ireland, a more unified Ireland. I go to Belfast a lot. The every 1 hour service is very important and is being useful. We can continue to collaborate on education, on health, and thank you.
Well done, Áine, thank you. Oisin Smith, you're next.
I'm Oisin Smith. My whole adult life, I've been a climate activist. I come back to this university after 30 years where I studied computer science. And although a lot looks the same, the major change in the university is from the diversity of its intake, that there have been huge changes in the kind of people who are attending the university. I think 1/3 of people who are in the college are from outside of the island of Ireland. And that is a positive, because that means we now have stronger teams to combat and to research and to investigate the problems that face society, like climate change. If I am in the Seanad, I will be a strong voice for climate action. Next week, a new government will be formed in Ireland, which is likely to require or to depend on people who are climate skeptics. In that situation, where we have a raft of laws that require ministers and require government departments to reduce emissions, we need somebody who will hold those people to account. We need somebody who feels strongly about tackling the biggest problem facing us and our children and our grandchildren. And if I am elected, I will serve you. I will be honoured to represent you and the college.
Okay, thank you. Oisín, over to you, Kevin Byrne.
So senators from this constituency and graduates from this college have made a great contribution to the open society we all value. But I argue this open society is today challenged by instability on our continent, a reduced sense of public safety, and insecurity in our higher education sector. To address this, I want to bring to bear my years of advocacy for a better Dublin and a stronger European Union, as well as my training as a research scientist with higher education governance experience. I will apply the evidence-based problem-solving scientific method to our politics, highlighting and putting pressure on a key set of issues where being your senator will allow me to make a real difference. To do this, I need your support, but also your engagement. I want to bring the experience of this university and expertise in it to bear on public policy. Before 400 years of Trinity parliamentary representation ends, I aim to make you proud as your senator. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that, Kevin Byrne. Laoise De Bruin.
My name is Laoise De Bruin, and I'm a mother of 3 and a practicing barrister in criminal law. 5 years ago, I founded the Countess, a human rights organisation protecting the rights of women, children, parents, and the LGBT community. I never intended to become an activist, but I could see how legislation meant to protect the rights of one group would in fact harm the protective rights of others, namely women and children. My campaigning has stopped the government removing the word woman from maternity legislation. I led a referendum grassroots campaign for no, because I could see that the government's amendments would strip constitutional rights and protections from mothers. I've drafted legislation to close the loophole with regard to prisons and males who identify as female, as I've discussed. And I've pushed back really hard at a grassroots level against ideological driven policy and law that bears no connection to what people actually care about on the ground in Ireland. I'd like to think that I could be part of a rich team of Trinity senators who are prepared to challenge the status quo and the orthodoxy if necessary. It would be my honour to represent you in this, the last ever TCD panel in this Seanad election. Vote Laoise De Bruin for courage, for compassion, for candour.
Okay, thank you, Laoise De Bruin. Over to you next, Paul Mulville.
Thanks, Áine. Yeah, my name is Paul Mulville. I've been a county councillor for the past 10 years. I'm female county councillor with the Social Democrats, but my political journey started here on campus, where I was the student activist for many years, involved in the Shell to Sea campaign, the campaign to boycott Killer Coke and Nestle, and to get the US military out of Shannon Airport. And in later years, when I saw the devastation caused by the climate breakdown affecting my neighbours and friends in Portrane and the rapid coastal erosion and the coastal flooding, I decided to stand for the county council to try and get something done about it. Since then, I've been campaigning hard in the matter and been active in the council's climate SPC and the coastal liaison group. But I've seen the limitations of our weak local government system. I think really I'm hoping to take that issue to the Seanad and be a strong voice to continue the strong tradition of reforming progressive senators representing Trinity College. Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you, Paul Mulville. Tom Clonan.
Thanks very much. I'm going to speak real fast because I've only got 1 minute. So I'm from Finglas. I went to the Christian Brothers. Trinity transformed me, made me the participative citizen that I am. It gave me my intellectual and my ethical formation. I have worked for the last 20 years on gender-based violence, and then as an accidental campaigner, as a parent and a carer to a young man with a neuromuscular disease. Since I was elected by my fellow graduates, I've introduced 2 complex pieces of legislation that introduce rights. And speaking to your point, I've brought my fellow senators on board, including members of government, to renege on a cabinet instruction to progress my legislation. I defeated and got the notorious Green Paper on disability reform, which would have compulsorily medically examined all disabled citizens. I had that scrapped. I have campaigned successfully to have the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities fully ratified by government in November. And most significantly, I campaigned single-handedly against the ableist wording of the care referendum back in March of last year. My final point is at the moment there are 50 100,000 postal votes still in the homes of Trinity graduates. Will you please search amongst the Christmas wrapping paper, the Christmas cards, and vote for Sive, vote for Paul, vote for Leisha, vote for Oisin, vote for Kevin, vote for Ade, whose beautiful son Shore went to school with my son, and I always compare my kids with your scholars.
Come on.
And finally, for Lynn, for Aubrey, please use your vote for them. But most of all, vote Tom Clonan number one.
Thank you, Tom Clonan. I knew you'd get there at the end.
Hugo as well.
And Sive O'Neill.
Graduates, let me represent you. I am a Trinity graduate with over 3 decades, actually it's 3.5 decades, I have to admit, of experience in environmental campaigning and advocacy. I will prioritise solutions for our society, our economy, and our environment that are within planetary boundaries. I was elected at the age of 20 while I was still a student at Trinity, and I served 5 years as a public representative, still in my early 20s. I've worked for environmental NGOs, I've taught environmental politics and climate policy at university level. I have litigated, I have taken the state to court, and I've contributed to both the policies that led to the climate law that we have, the 2021, and its implementation and its scrutiny at the Oireachtas Committee. I contribute regularly in the national media, and I write for the Irish Times. Elect me as a dedicated expert to the Oireachtas, and let's work together for a green future.
Okay, thank you, Sive O'Neill. So, like earlier, we have roving mics. We have a lot of questions coming in online. So I might actually go to our online audience first just to switch it around. But if we can get microphones and just be ready, and we'll take 2 questions. Let's go to 2 different parts of the room. So gap jumper here, and let's take this lady over here, and we'll be ready to go. So thank you to our online audience. We are live streaming tonight, as everyone knows. And we have a question from Nicholas O'Brien, which was, please ask each candidate to state their position on Israel. So I will go, Sive, I'll start with you, and we'll switch this around. If I can just ask each of you, please be brief so we can get through as many audience questions as possible. Sive O'Neill, you can go first.
Where to start? I don't know how to be brief.
I know, complex issue.
I recognise the state of Israel. I'm support of a 2-state solution for the conflict with Palestine, but it's so much bigger than that. Because it questions really our approach to international law and its implementation. I fully believe, and I'm not the only one, there are many states that believe it, and the International Criminal Court believes it, that Israel is currently guilty of, is prosecuting a genocide in Gaza. And the actions that the state of Israel is taking in the West Bank are also deplorable. Its attitude towards the humanitarian relief that has been restricted from getting to Palestinians in aid is unthinkable and despicable in every possible way. But do I recognize the state of Israel? Yes, I do. I happen to love Israeli literature, by the way, and myself and a friend about 10 years ago tried to set up a reading group. I have an interest in that. And I love Israeli culture and Jewish culture. But the state of Israel has a lot to answer for. And I am disturbed by the fact that diplomatic relations between Ireland and Israel are now going to be thwarted since that they closed their embassy in Ireland.
Sive O'Neill, Tom Clonan.
Let me be really clear. The genocidal attack by Hamas on October the 7th was precisely that, an attempt to annihilate men, women and children. It was a clear breach of international law. And Hamas, by holding hostages, they are war criminals. Hezbollah in Lebanon, by definition, are war criminals. They've murdered indiscriminately, and including Irish peacekeepers. But let me be clear. Israel has slaughtered, the Israeli Defense Forces have slaughtered over 50,000, mostly innocent men, women and children. It is femicide, it is infanticide, it is urbanicide, scholasticide. When you draw back from that and look at the precise calculus of international military law, the laws of armed conflict, the Geneva Conventions, Netanyahu, his cabinet, and the IDF and the general staff are in clear, flagrant breach of the most basic fundamental rules of engagement. They do not allow for the safe evacuation of civilians. They've targeted civilian objects, dropping 1,000 kilogram high explosive weapons on tented areas with children, targeting hospitals and schools.
Okay.
I am a great admirer of Israel and the Israeli people, but Netanyahu and his cabinet are sowing the seeds of cataclysmic destruction in the Middle East and beyond. And if we allow this usurpation of the international rules-based order, we will all suffer the consequences in this century, and our children and our grandchildren.
Tom Clonan, Paul Mulville.
Well, just briefly, I guess as myself and Teo were in the hospital in Coombe over the weekend, we were thinking about the women giving birth in Gaza, for example, suffering the genocide, suffering the destruction of the hospitals there, and how awful it must be for them. Certainly, at the last council meeting I was at, I sponsored a motion to the calling of the government to ratify the Occupied Territories Bill. It's an absolutely vital bit of legislation that Francis will actually putting forward, and we've heard from other party leaders before the election they would support it, so they need to ratify that now and bring that into law and stop prevaricating.
Thank you. Paul Mulville, Leisha de Bruin.
I studied comparative law as part of my law degree when I was here in Trinity, and part of that was the Abrahamic faiths, and one of them obviously is Judaism. And I have a deep respect for Judaism as a faith and as a culture, but I reject any label of anti-Semitism when it comes to, as the panel have already said, a condemnation of what's happening currently. It is genocide. There is also a brutal occupation. The war in Gaza is killing 70% of the deaths are women and children. We've all seen the footage. I applaud the Irish government in terms of joining the suite at the ICJ. I do think there possibly could have been a more delicate form of statecraft when it came to the Israeli embassy leaving, but I don't necessarily think that we should be weighing up how this will affect us economically. I think something like this is a moral cause more than anything else, and I think that 9 out of 10 people in Ireland see what they see with their own eyes on their iPhones. I mean, I remember well, I was in Israel for a good number of weeks when I was still in Trinity, and I toured all of Israel, and I saw both sides, and I stayed in Herzliya Batua in Tel Aviv, and I also stayed in East Jerusalem, which is an Arab or Palestinian quarter, and it was very obvious, it was visceral how the conflict had impacted both sides and how both sides lived in terms of the occupation. So I think it's really important to have a conversation about how we can play our role. I'm mindful of our peacekeepers out in that region and an escalation. But I think that Irish people, because of our history, particularly as a colony, we feel very deeply what's happening out there.
Leisha de Bruin, thank you for that. If I can go to you now, Kevin Byrne.
So after October 7th and Hamas's pogrom, there was certainly grounds for Israeli action in response to that, but it has become completely disproportionate, and it's clearly indiscriminate as regards civilian casualties. And that's clear from a lot of Israeli reporting, where the rules of engagement are much more lax than they were in previous Israeli campaigns. So there's a lot of evidence from Israeli reporting on that. And it seems very clear that Netanyahu is looking to extend the war to retain his own time in office, because that keeps him out of jail. So, I think that's a contributing factor. And it's worth saying that the families of the Israeli hostages generally want this war to conclude because they're looking to get their loved one home. They don't see prolonging that helping with that. So I think it's long overdue it ended. So I welcome today's talk of a ceasefire finally being.
Thank you, Kevin Byrne. Oisin Smith.
Yes, I just want to say that both Israel and Palestine have a right to exist, and they both have a right to defend their own borders and their own people, and that the attack on October 7th by Hamas, where more than 1,000 Israelis were murdered and civilians were murdered at a music festival, is horrific. That the response from the Israelis was absolutely disproportionate. You cannot kill tens of thousands of children and maintain any kind of moral high ground. So I would like to see the EU-Israel Association Agreement. I would like to see the humanitarian clauses of that invoked, and I would like to see that happen at EU level.
Okay, thank you, Oisin Smith. And to you, Ade Olubrode.
Thank you so much. As somebody from Nigeria, where there was terrorist attack on innocent people all the time, I feel the pain of the Israelites in regards of what happened to them on the 7th of October. It's totally reprehensible watch the terrorist attack that was unleashed on them, on women, on children, right in their own home. However, the response of the IDF has become so extremely disproportionate, is now highly condemnable. So I understand, and I am in support of the fact that if Ireland wants to stand, we want to keep our hands clear of goods produced in a place where there's been so huge amount of bloodshed, blood of children, of innocent people have been shed in the conflict zone of Gaza. So I totally support the Occupied Territory Bill. it's not against the all of Israel. We will still continue to export and import from Israel, but the occupied territory bill only affects the area of conflict, and I totally support that. We don't want to touch any goods or services produced from a land where there has been huge bloodshed.
Okay, thank you, Ade Olubrode. To the room here, I know we've mics ready, and I'm going to take the two questions together. If you can state your name, if you are here canvassing, supporting a candidate, just be transparent about it, and a question, not a speech, please. Where do we have the two mics? Just give me hands up. One here, and then one over here. Okay, Blue, go first. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Hi all, my name's Tony Rowe. I'm a student here in Trinity. I'm a member of the Young Greens, and I've canvassed for Oisín and Hazel, both of them before in the election just gone. So obviously, I'd assume most people here, and it's clear from the panel, that we all agree on the urgency of the climate crisis. I have an open question to the panel: how they would tackle aviation emissions and the aviation industry in general, as they seem to not want to change much, or anything that will affect their profits is a no-go for them, especially when it comes to the passenger cap at Dublin Airport, the question of whether we should be keeping the cap and moving it to regional airports, and also to SIVE on the reopening of Waterford Airport as a new regional airport.
Okay.
Thank you.
Who would you like to direct it for the efficiency of time, your question to in particular?
SIVE and Oisín, anyone wants to,
Okay.
whatever.
Okay, SIVE and Oisín. So hold that question. We'll come back to it in a second. And the lady here with the second microphone, if you can add your question into the mix.
Yeah, I would like to ask the candidates in general what you think about diversity. Like, for example, transgender issues have been mentioned quite a lot. There's no transgender people in the Dáil, and like people of colour, you don't see many, or women in the Dáil, Seanad. So what you think would legislate or for in order to enact a more diverse and representative what's the word? Democracy. But also for Alicia, I was just wondering, like, you talk about LGBT people an awful lot, and that's very strange to me as a bisexual woman, because all of the people that I would know in the community would have no issue with transgender people. And I wonder what makes you qualified to talk about LGBT rights. And I also had a question about your experience, just that you have down that you're an unpaid volunteer with the Countess, which is largely an organisation that gives out about transgender people. How exactly would that make you qualified for the Seanad?
Okay, and can you just give us your name and if you're a canvasser supporter for anyone?
My name is Bridget Niari Joyce, and I am the editor-in-chief of Trinity student newspaper, the University Times.
Okay, thank you for that. So, Leisha, there's a few things there for you, and we'll come back to the question. First question that we have for SIVE and Oisín. Actually, to mix it up, Oisín, you go first, and SIVE second.
So,
thanks.
to address the question about how do you reduce aviation emissions, aviation emissions are the hardest of all transport emissions to reduce. And we're an island, so it's very hard for us to do what other European countries can do, which is to switch to trains to get between their international borders. We have to fly. So it's going to be, it's a massive challenge. Ireland is the centre of aviation finance of the world. We're the best at that. We should also be the best at sustainable aviation fuels. So we should be looking at how we can make aviation fuel, which can be done already from hydrogen or from biofuel or from alternative sources, so that we can continue to fly, we can continue to leave our country, but at the same time, it is going to be a very difficult thing to do.
Okay, and SIVE O'Neill.
Yeah, so there's a lot we can do to manage aviation emissions. Currently, for example, they're not included in the carbon budget. So therefore, there's no target set for aviation emissions. Everywhere else, all the other sectors have to reduce on average by 51%, no target for aviation. So that's the first problem. If there are no limits set, we have a situation where demand growth will inevitably follow. And it's already happening, as we can see from the increased demand and stresses on Dublin Airport. The passenger cap at Dublin Airport is an extremely important planning tool that must be protected and maintained, because it doesn't just put a restriction on noise and air emissions that affect local residents in Fingal, as I'm sure Paul would know all about, but it also has an impact on the movements of aircraft, their operations, and as a result, it keeps the greenhouse gas emissions impact lower or at a certain level. So the passenger cap is an extremely important policy tool that must be protected. And it's very, very worrying that many of the political parties, the two political parties about to form a government, are trying to, or at least vocal about wanting to see that lifted. Now, in the context of a cap, you can distribute or share the emissions around in some way, only if you have a cap. If you have a free-for-all, which is what we have at the moment, even though DAA owns another 2 airports, I think, you have a sort of a misallocation economically and of emissions between the regional airports and Dublin. Dublin is sucking. It's a huge magnet for economic activity and development and emissions and environmental impact, and it should not grow any further. It's big enough. The surrounding road infrastructure can't even accommodate it, and it'll be 2040 before there's a Metrolink to the airport.
Okay.
So the reason I was in support of actually just extending an existing runway, it's already there, it's just that it's not long enough to accommodate most passenger jets, is to facilitate Waterford Airport to operate as a really small regional airport. Its overall impact on emissions growth would be negligible. There is a welcome diversion of some traffic to Cork and Shannon, and that's where the main growth should come from within an overall cap.
Very, very briefly, Paul.
Just very briefly, just ban private jet travel. Schiphol has done it, and it's made a good impact so far.
And Tom Clonan, did you want to come in there?
Just very briefly, coincidentally, because my son is a wheelchair user, for the last 22 years, we've gone on all of our family holidays by ferry to Europe. And I know that's not ideal as an alternative to flight, but it works. And when Owen had his spinal surgery, he missed his TY visit to the Colosseum in Rome. So myself and Owen and the family, we drove to Rome, and we parked on a disabled parking bay outside the Colosseum. We went in, we saw everything, and the car was stolen. And so we came home on public transport. But it is doable, and it does work.
Okay, thank you for that. And Áine, you just very, very briefly, you wanted to come in there.
Thank you. Yes, I was going to buttress what Shai said about the fact that the aviation industry, they were totally exempted from the obligation to reduce their carbon emission. So in light of that, nobody should enjoy a free fall in this. It's everybody's challenge. So I recommend that there should be a body set up to oversee the aviation industry, maybe at the EU level, so that they can be accountable to them, real experts who can really see how much emission they can reduce. Everybody needs to have a target.
Okay, thank you. And then the second question, to pick it up from the University Times. Leisha, there was a lot in there. Hopefully you kept a note.
No, I didn't, but it's okay. I just want to say thank you so much. You're the editor of the Student Times. Thank you so much for the question. Is your job as a journalist to ask the challenging questions? And I was a journalist once, and that's what journalism should do. Firstly, I want to start off by saying that the Gender Recognition Act was brought in to give rights to trans people in Ireland. And I have no doubt it was brought in from a place of compassion, and that's a good thing. However, nobody at the time, legislators did not look around the corner. They did not look and think about the unintended consequences of that legislation. And now what we see in Ireland and in other jurisdictions who have done the same thing is there is a conflict of rights when it comes to sports, when it comes to prisons, when it comes to safe spaces, intimate spaces, changing rooms, toilets, and issues, parts of areas of life where we need single-sex spaces. And the reason we have single-sex spaces for women and girls is so that we can have equality outside the home. And this was completely common sense up until a moment ago. But because of the orthodoxy and the official narrative around trans rights, the whole narrative in the media and generally has been, and in the establishment, in fact, has been nothing to see here. This is, if you're against this, you're far right somehow, or you're somehow a bigot. My whole life has really been about protecting the rights of women and children and child safeguarding. And so therefore, I am unafraid to look at it through this lens and really to grasp the nettle. And, I do so from a place of compassion, from a considered place, from a reasoned place, which is measured. And my whole work with the Countess has been to facilitate a conversation which is calm, compassionate, considered. And because of that work, that rigorous research-based work, evidence-based work, our organisation has presented twice to the UN as subject matter experts. with regard to the impact on women and girls. We presented to Salim, the rapporteur for women and girls, and also we presented with regard to single-sex sports. You know, whether or not you agree, it is simply a fact that there is a conflict of rights when, for example, a boy of 12 can fill out a form and play ladies Gaelic football in this country, when we are putting men who are in the words of the judge at the time, a clear and present danger to women when we're housing them with women. These women are vulnerable, and I think it's important to have empathy for both sides of this debate and to be able, as a democracy, to have the conversation. We have to be able to have these conversations without one side being labelled or shut down. And I promise, as a senator, if I am elected, that I will continue that work in terms of facilitating a conversation where not just one narrative is accepted. And with regard to legislation, similarly with hate speech, you know, it's really important to elect a senator who has that incisive mind and capability and can look at legislation, but also can challenge it and challenge the orthodoxy if necessary.
Thank you, Leisha de Bruin. Paul Mulville, you want to
very briefly, as a party, the Social Democrats, we're proud to support transgender people. We had a candidate in the recent local elections from a transgender background. We've seen attacks in our public libraries. We've in North County Dublin, for example, I have a good friend here who stood up for the library service and for the librarians in North County Dublin. People are spreading fear, disinformation about transgender rights, and I think we need to support the librarians when they stand up and support their trade unions when they fight back against the fear and disinformation that's being spread.
Anyone else want to come in on that? Sive O'Neill?
I'm just very bothered by the kind of rhetoric from Leisha, and it's ironic because I have a daughter called Leisha, by the way, so I can't be cross with you. I can't. But you know, you describe trans people as they're a kind of a menace, and that's so deeply offensive to trans people. I have friends who are trans people, and but very few of them, because there are actually very few people. There are very few people we're talking about here, and the way you talk about it makes it sound like there's a kind of an epidemic, you know, of people out there who are trying to get onto sports teams and get into prison in the wrong cubicles. And it's just really frustrating, because what trans people want is respect and equality. And that is not so much to ask for in a world where we're supposed to guarantee civil liberties for everybody.
Thank you, Simon. I'll let you back in, Leisha, because I know you object there to the summarisation and a phrase used.
To the framing of that. I mean, I'm not anti-trans in any way. If I was, I wouldn't have a trans person working so closely with me and supporting my campaign. Many trans people are not happy with the current legislation, with the current extremism. I mean, I have spoken at events where trans activists have actively either assaulted attendees, private citizens who've come to my events, or in fact tried to scream down and shout down women who are talking about issues like domestic violence, or, you know, issues like, you know, issues where they're highly vulnerable discussing these matters. I have always, in my work with the Countess, tried to really reduce the heat and come from a place of compassion. So I reject any framing that anything I do comes from anything other than a place of compassion. But it's important to look at both sides. That's our job as legislators.
Leisha de Bruin. Anyone else want to come in on that? Very good. That was our, we've so many questions online, I know, in the audience, but we are at time. We're actually beyond time. We lost the run of ourselves somewhere during that debate. Give it up for our 7 candidates. Thank you for the debate, for the pitches, for answering questions. If I can take... we have, sorry, bear with me one moment. We have the video from the candidate who couldn't make it earlier. If we can just take a moment to listen to this, and then I'm going to give you your final call to action. But due to personal reasons, he wasn't able to attend tonight. If we can play that, please. This should be from Abbas, if we have it ready to go. And if not, I can do our call to actions and reminders, and hopefully we can come back to the video of Abbas Ali O'Shea. So why don't I do that while we try to get the video? So just if I can do 2 calls to action. One is to the point earlier. Those watching online here in the audience, you have your ballot papers. Get them to the return center at Trinity before 11 a.m. on the 29th of January. The count will begin on January 29 in the exam hall on Front Square. All are welcome to attend. And a reminder, this is the last time the University of Dublin constituency will elect senators to the Seanad. Your second reminder and call to action is that under the new legislation, we have the University of Dublin and NUI constituencies being replaced. And if you want to get access to your voting rights there, you have to register, complete the process by the 23rd of January. And you can do that by going to seanadvoter.ie. And I think we have our video ready to go now from Abbas Ali O'Shea. So let's play that.
Hello, my name is Abbas Ali O'Shea. Unfortunately, I could not be there today as my father passed away recently, and I'm attending his funeral in Iraq. I'm committed to the principle of integration and diversity in my daily life and in my work. If I elected to the Seanad, I will build on these principles. I'm also passionate about advancing investment in education, culture, commerce, and social cohesion in Ireland. I believe these are crucial elements to build a society where all communities, regardless of background, feel empowered and represented. As a member of Seanad, I would work hard to contribute to these efforts, ensuring that the interests of the Irish population are well served. The education sector and sport education are particularly passion of mine. I aim to use my experience in working in a variety of roles of this educational sector and my research in sport education to contribute to debate and policy development in these sectors. I hope to provide a new perspective in the Seanad and work to harness the benefit of diversity of our society. It will be an honor for me to be able to count on your support in the election. Thank you very much, Abbas.
Was Abbas Ali O'Shea, your 16th and final candidate for the 3 seats. So you have your reminders there on dates. Some people online and in the room were asking about a recording that will be available on the YouTube channel. Please, just one final time, give a round of applause to our candidates for their time and energy tonight. To Provost Linda Doyle for the introductory remarks tonight, to Dr. Patrick O'Leary, Registrar of NUI, who joined us tonight, to the Trinity Communications team. They make it look easy, but there's so much work for weeks and weeks that went into this. A huge shout out to all of them. You've seen them dotted around tonight. They are amazing at ruthless prioritisation and radical focus for the last couple of weeks. Huge thanks to them and the Secretary's office. Oh, well, thank you very much. I will take that. And remember, go vote. Use your democracy rights and go vote in the coming days. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.